in the stream to make sure our audio is looking good.
Dan, you just have this uncanny way of immediately talking the second I hit the go live button. It's amazing. How's everyone doing today? Welcome to Stormkeep Live number 15.
Hey y'all, how's it going?
Let's make sure audio works, as after that one time I'm always paranoid that it's not gonna.
Not paranoia if everyone's trying to kill you.
Humor Gonk talking.
One sec.
Oh, hey, can you hear me?
I think Morgonk is still holding out for that new microphone.
It might be, most definitely.
We are working on getting you one, man. We are working on that.
It sounds like Morgonk's just a tad bit low, but I think it's just, be a little closer to the mic, that's all. But otherwise, we're looking good.
Cool. Well, I just turned them up on my end, so hopefully that'll go through a bit. Okay. And we are live. So, hello everybody.
Hey everybody!
Howdy.
Morgonk's rocking that cyber hobo chic.
It's my cosplay, my Mr. Robot cosplay.
Nice.
So I guess the first topic is that we can officially announce that we have merchandise. That we, after talking about it forever, have finally created something and now it's available for sale. We've made a pack of dice that are limited run. We're kind of just seeing how dice manufacturing goes, what the margins look like, what shipping looks like, because we've got fans all over the world. There's a couple continents that we're not shipping to yet. But we'll get there. If you live in Antarctica, I'm sorry. We're going to have to exclude you for a bit. We also have these really cool rangefinders. We've been talking about doing these pretty much since we started the podcast, and we started having like 7-inch deep strikes, and we're like, oh, I wish I had a range stick that was 7 and one that was 9 instead of like measuring off the 9-inch stick and trying to find the 7. Just, it'd be a cool little thing, and we thought that's like a uniquely Stormcast thing that only we can do. So decided to go for that. So we've got these cool rangefinders, courtesy of Kaiju Gaming. They've been a great sponsor, working back and forth with this. If you guys are interested in getting some cool dice, the logo designed by one of our Discord patrons, or if you're looking for some rangefinders that have our new logo, which will eventually be integrated into the podcast, I promise. It's just been a crazy time of year, but that cool new logo there, that's going to be on the podcast. So if you want either of these, hit up kaijugaminglounge.com. They are our official sponsor, and we really like working with them. They also have the new Battle Forces for sale, if anybody's looking at those. I know the Stormcast one looks pretty good. If you're one of the few people who doesn't have 15,000 points of Stormcast like us, then it's a great box.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. It's a good box.
Good.
I think all the boxes except for maybe the DOK one are pretty good.
I'm really surprised,
the Nighthaunt one's
yeah.
a little disjointed, I think. The Nighthaunt one seems a little disjointed because it has a bunch of models.
Yeah, but it's like if you buy 2 of those, that's an army.
No, that's pretty good.
You
Yeah.
can just sell the all-in.
Yeah, I actually sat down and did all the math, and 2 of every single one of those boxes comes out to like 2,000 points.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Stormcast one is really good value. If you make a Knight Draconis and a regular Drake, then you've got a ton of points in that box.
Yeah,
for sure.
Vigilors are, not the best unit, but you can proxy them as crossbow
adjudicators. Yep, that's what I do.
Great conversion bases. But if you do get some sticks from us from Kaiju, they look super awesome. I hope that one's clear. But they also, there's a package bundle where you can get a combat tool. Basically, it's a 3-inch, 2-inch, 1-inch, half-inch kind of little tool. You've probably seen a lot of these around. And you can get them together, and I think it's $13 for that bundle, US.
That sounds right.
Check those out. It's pretty good. You can get them in the different colors. If you want them finished in gold, they can come already in gold like such. And then if you want them, they can come in still wrapped up. So this one's a blue one, but still wrapped up in the cutting edge. And what you can do is spray paint it. So this is actually...
Maybe turn off your background there, Dan, because it's blurring in too much.
Probably do it. If you just take some spray paint or even just some base paint, like any base layer paint, this is Runelord Brass, and just paint it on there or spray it. I had a spray, and basically you just peel off the sticker after that, and it will look really clean, just like this one does. It's super easy to do. You literally just shave it off like a coin, anything really. and it just comes right off. So, check those out. There's different options along with the dice as well.
Yeah, we don't have faction terrain, but maybe we have faction range sticks. That could be our thing.
Yeah.
Only if they get a cool rule when you put them on the table.
Oh boy. I don't think we're allowed to have cool rules. We're just stats and points, and that's all we got.
Yep.
Mostly stats.
Mostly stats, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Considering their internal balance chart that GW themselves put up, yeah.
That was a really interesting thing. The more this new guy talks, the more I like Games Workshop. So they should just make him write every article. That would be fantastic.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah, he definitely hit some of the right points, like looking at the right things. I like how incremental change are their goals. I like how he talks about how they don't want to shift too much, how even some things that might be overused, what kind of win rate are they, substituting? I'm glad he's also looking at things like, is an army just has a higher win rate because of a lot of 5-0s or like a lot of 3-2s, Things like that, like really breaking it down. That's really awesome to see.
Do you think it will? Go ahead, Jack.
I was gonna say I was really digging the section where they were talking about the fact that Arcane Tome still has a ridiculously high inclusion rate, but that doesn't actually seem to impact the overall performance of the armies.
Yeah, it doesn't translate into a high win rate for that army.
Right, exactly. So I'm hoping that they just leave it alone, because Lord Relictor with an Arcane Tome is the best thing ever.
Well, the Arcane Tome is not a big deal for external balance, but for internal balance, it is a big deal. Because, if we had to, if we couldn't just give the Lord Relictor an Arcane Tome, we would actually have to bring a wizard, like a Knight Incantor, which is a good wizard, but it's we overlook it because we just have a Lord Relictor. Both are +0 wizards, so why would we bother, right? We bring a Battle Mage, right? So for internal balance, the Arcane Tome is a problem, but for external, it seems fine. It's actually an equalizing factor that things like Dwarf armies can bring an Arcane Tome to get access to an Unbind and casting endless spells and all that stuff. So I really like it. I hope they keep it around. I hope armies that are overusing the Arcane Tome see some targeted changes to their enhancements to make them more interesting rather than just default
more appealing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the thing that I'm looking for, is that if something seems like it's being overused, there's a reason why, and that reason isn't always because the enhancement's too good. So, in our example, why would I ever bring a Lord Arcanum on foot? There's no reason. I'll just take the Knight Incantor.
The other thing I can see them doing is each hero can only have one role, so you can either already be a priest or a wizard, but you can't become a wizard with an Arcane Tome. Does that make sense? If you're already a priest, you should be able to become a wizard. You should be able to put it on heroes that aren't.
How many armies does that impact? Stormcast, Fyreslayers, Daughters of Khaine.
Yeah.
Doesn't really seem like a fair rule. Maybe
Khorne can't take Arcane Tome, I don't think.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, okay, that's right.
Yeah, they take it on a Demon Prince, pretty sure, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was gonna say I've seen it in a Khorne army.
Yeah.
Well, Daughters of Khaine, they have a lot of priests. They still sometimes take Arcane Tome. It's not an auto-include for them. They have other good artifacts that they can take instead.
Yeah, they do.
I think that's the solution, is just make other stuff better and not...
Better, yeah.
This thing doesn't need a change.
Well, it's we look at Lumineth, right? We're not making any lists with Arcane Tome. Most of that time we're taking, Silver One and then Lower Seeker or whatever?
Silver One's worse than Arcane Tome, so if you have Silver One, you should take Arcane Tome instead.
Taking Arcane Tome, yeah.
Yeah. But I see your point, right? Well, why would it be worse? It's because you can't give it to a non-wizard. So if you give it to a Bannerblade, for example, the Arcane Tome turns the Bannerblade into a wizard. Silver One doesn't.
Yeah. Sorry, I forgot that there were Lumineth heroes that weren't wizards.
It's so weird, right? That they have non-wizard units.
Imagine.
I guess that's a fun thing we can talk about real quick. The Lumineth proper FAQ dropped, right? And I'd rather talk about that now before we get into the rest of it, just because
ranking.
Because Techless knows all the spells finally. That's good, right?
Thank God. Yep.
That's what we assumed was going to happen, and I'm glad that's the case. Although it could have been interesting to live in a world where Techless cost 500 points, and he autocast one spell, and you wanted spell enhancements. That could have been an interesting way to balance the game. Narratively, though, it doesn't make any sense, so I'm glad.
He's a god of magic. There's no way.
Well, apparently Teclis hit him so hard that he had memory loss.
Nagash. Yeah.
Nagash.
Or
Yeah.
Nagash, yeah.
Damn, Nagash hit you too. You forgot.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm glad for that change. I mean, we knew it was coming. That's how they played it at the KC Open before the FAQ. What was highly interesting to see was the Stoneguard change, the Rend Ignore, or how they how it's ruled. So for those of you who don't know how it was ruled was, basically the reduce Rend effects happens before modifiers, not after. So if you have something that, for instance, like a Big Wah, or something like Idoneth Deepkin Bolt Spear, which says change the Rend characteristic from this to this, if it makes a charge move, the Rend Ignore parts only applies to the part that exists before that modifier is put into place, not for what it's after.
Basically, set effects happen before modifier effects. So if you have a Rend 1 Lance and you charge a Stoneguard unit that has ignore Rend 1 or set Rend 1 to 0, you set the Rend to 0, then you add 1 to Rend because of your bonus. And that is actually consistent with other ways they've clarified things, like Bounty Hunter's bonus damage versus effects that ignore damage, or things that set the damage, right? So if you had, for example, and they had to errata this, remember, they had Fulminators, when they charge, you set their damage to 3, and then Bounty Hunters is +1 on top of that, and that's how everybody pretty much played it. And they put out an errata that they had to change later, but the errata basically said, like, no, you change it, but then you set it. And everyone was like, this doesn't really make sense. Nobody's playing it this way, and it's not consistent with the rules. So they had to go back and change it and say, no, set comes first. So you set the damage to 3, then you modify +1. And that is consistent now with the Stoneguard, right? So, but like, I don't think anybody thought of it that way. I don't think anybody was considering that kind of consistency across these two different effects, because part of the reason Bounty Hunters worked the way it did, I think people were thinking, is because it specifically says when you target a unit. So there was a timing thing, right? Like, if you charged, you had set to damage 3, and then when you target that unit, it's +1. So there was a timing issue, but I guess the timing doesn't actually matter now. That's fine.
The timing doesn't matter, and not only that, but it actually, I think it makes them a little bit better, because against some units, like previously, if you just had -3 Rend, that would just choose straight through. They couldn't do anything about it.
Well, if you had a Rend 2 effect bumped the Rend 3.
Yeah, increased to -3. So if you went from a Makresh's declared like a Big Wah, they hit with -2 Rend, and you hit them with -3 using Big Wah, that would just go straight through. They couldn't do anything about it. But now they can. Now that is basically effectively -1.
Right.
But a Celestin Prime's hammer will still go through.
And it's overall, I think it's a nerf, because there's way more units that are Rend 1 or Rend 0 that get bumped up to Rend 2 or Rend 1. And now those units actually have real Rend against Stoneguard. So I think this actually makes that worse than it did before. And it makes Eumetrica's bonus less impactful, because if you're fighting Stormdrake with Lances and you picked Eumetrica and it's Rend 1 whether you're Eumetrica or not, why bother, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's weird.
I really wish that they had just made that effect reduce the Rend by X amount and been super easy to deal with.
Well,
so that we didn't have to deal with these.
Well,
yeah, but I don't see any problem with it.
It's the best rules ever. There's no room for arguments.
It's fine. I mean, ultimately, Stoneguard will just see more play post Bounty Hunters, so it's whatever.
Yeah, that's the real thing to wait for, is what everything's going to look like after this season. So
yeah.
Horror's coming back.
Speaking of which,
oh boy,
today we have some slides for you.
Well, we're going to talk about the painting contest first.
Yeah, we're gonna do...
Oh yeah, yes.
Because so in end of October, start of November, we are running our Lord Commander painting contest. And let's swap over to that. Bam. Apparently, I'm the only one with a painted Gardas or Bastion in this team. Good job, team.
No, I got one.
You didn't send it.
Take a picture.
I
just didn't take a picture.
All right. Well, there's my Gardas if anybody cares. So we had a painting Lord Commanders, and Gardas is basically a Lord Commander. Let's be real here. They're going to give him a new model at some point. It's going to be Lord Commander Gardas, and it's going to be awesome. But we thought single figure. People put a lot of work into these centerpiece models, so we could see some really cool technical stuff on display. I am not a very good technical painter. I'm very basic, like edge highlighting kind of guy. So I'm really interested to see what other people were capable of doing. So we actually had a lot of entries for this one, more than usual. We had like 45, I think. Dan, what was the final number?
45.
Yeah. yeah, that's a lot of entries. Yep. So combing through all these was a lot of fun. We get to look at a lot of cool stuff. And we have selected 5 honorable mentions and 3 winners. And the prizes were listed on our Discord, so I'm not going to go over them. Let's go into it. And also I should point out our voting process, it's whatever you like, right? It's kind of like if anybody watches Red Letter Media, you vote for whatever criteria you feel like. If it's rule of cool, you can do that. If it's like whatever you think is technically the most proficient, it's everybody's votes are then aggregated, and then we figure out our winners that way. So yeah, let's get started with the honorable mentions. First up here is Jansen Ring, who's a regular in our painting contest and a regular in our Discord, and he has this awesome Spartan cast army. And he uses all these custom bits, and this is just another example of how great Stormcasts look as Spartans. You can very much see the influence there, the breastplates, what would you even call that, the chain loincloths. Like, it all just looks very Spartan. So when you do something simple like swap the helmet, swap the shield, or just give him a shield, I guess in this case, and give him a spear instead of a hammer, it's like, yeah, that's just a big Spartan demigod. Like, it looks awesome every time.
Yeah, dude, I really like this.
Do it. Oh,
Are we back?
I think we're back.
Yes, we're back.
Okay. That was very odd. I've never had that happen before.
Okay.
Oh dear. Okay. I hope we are looking at Kazarul's work here. Maybe the chat can let us know if we're back.
Yeah, we're good. I'm on it.
Sorry about that, guys. That was weird. Everything just started freezing up all of a sudden. I got a new computer last couple of weeks, so I've been working through the kinks. Okay. All right. We're back here with Kazarul's entry. This is a great looking bastion. I love that cloak. I don't know what's happening here. I'm really sorry. This is terrible. I have this whole thing prepared. Dang. Okay, I think we may be back. Okay, looks fine.
Okay, cool.
All my stats show
pretty
okay,
good.
but for some reason my computer just keeps messing up. I'll keep an eye on it. Okay, so yeah, Kazarul's entry. I think Kazarul's a regular in our Discord. It's nice to see him on the honorable mentions list. What do you guys think about this one?
I really like the free hand, like you were talking about the storm on the back. He really put together the silver and gold really well. I like the purple touch of that. It really brings the two colors together because purple is really good with the silver or gold accent. So that was a good choice for color there.
Mm-hmm.
I do wish I could see a little more on the hammer, right? Like a little bit more detail.
Yeah, it seems like you can make the runes glow there. That would be a good opportunity. Maybe add in some more color onto the parchment. You can see it's a little faded and drab and kind of just sticking off there on the side. So that those are rooms where you could add a bit more detail. I do like the red, the hints of red on the gems against the rest of like silver and gold. I think the red really stands out there. So yeah.
Yeah.
You're muted, Mergonk.
That's fine.
I just see you talking and you're nodding and you're like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, totally.
It's a good one.
Next up here, we have Neolad, aka Daniel. And this is just a very technically proficient Gardas. Pretty much what I was trying to do with mine. I think this just does it better. The highlights are cleaner, the face is better painted, the gold and silver looks like his classic color scheme. Nice thin highlights everywhere. I'm a big fan of this one. So I'm slapping it onto our honorable mentions. Nice job, Neolad. Or Daniel, whatever you want to be called.
It's that face. I can never do a face that good. Man.
Yeah, with the scars and everything. Yeah, pretty.
So well done. The subtle, like you can see the energy coming out of him going into the ground. That's probably my favorite thing too. It's the energy effect at the bottom. It's great.
Yep, very well done. I'm a big fan of this one. And we've definitely featured him on our painting contest before as well. So I hope you continue making more stuff, man. I love seeing it. Another honorable mention here is Yo_G. Yogg, however you want to pronounce it. Just a well-painted bastion, especially the cloak. I'm a big fan of that star pattern on the back there. That's really cool. The glowing runes on the weapon, the extra little leaves on the base. There's just a lot of things to like about this one.
Mm-hmm. I like that he went for the most classic Hammers of Sigmar look for him, like just on the box. You know, you've got the especially the shoulder piece being the kind of more oxidized metal look. It's really well done. I like that it's just a very clean bastion for the most part. I think the only thing that may have kept it back a little bit was some of the detail on the cape. If you were to zoom in on it, is a little probably like the worst part about it. But everything else is just so good, really well done. Getting the scars on his head to light up really well, and the face in general, getting the beard together, everything is really good.
Yeah, the glow from the weapons is really nice too.
Yeah, I like the way that glow looks. I kind of want to steal that.
Mm-hmm.
I also like the blue shading on the cloak is really well done. The recessed parts are nice and dark, and it's a smooth transition to the brighter parts. That's something I want to work on a lot with my cloaks. Is I have like really harsh highlights on mine. I want to work on a smoother transition there. All right. And I think this is our final honorable mention here. This is Del Noir, putting forth a very technically proficient Gardas, with a very interesting style of like this, like we've seen Gardas, like his hand explodes with lightning when he lands, but this kind of lighting, it almost looks like he's just brightening the area where he punches down. It's almost like that crack of lightning before you see the lightning arc. It's just that flash of light before that happens, and I think this is really cool. But
what I got from this one, I was just gonna just because what I got from this one was actually that he's in Nurgle's garden here.
Yeah, that's what I got too.
Yes, that's exactly where I'm at. Is that this is? I still think the lighting is what he was going for with the yellow, but you see how the rest of it's green, and how even the lightning has a bit of a greenish tone, and the landscape itself. I can see this being in Nurgle's garden. He just bashed off a couple flies and then dipped out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also like the blue kind of power flowing through the weapons. It looks really nice. It's shaded very well on both the. See, I had no idea what to do with the hammer on mine. That was a big problem for me with this model. It was such a large flat surface, and I just didn't know what to do with it. But it seems like he's done a really good job with like edge chipping here and there, making it look like there's like lightning arcing through it almost, very subtly. It looks great.
Yeah, I'm surprised he's holding what's basically a basic Liberator hammer.
Yeah, well, that's what a Lord Celestin uses, right? So that's what he got. Well, very well done, Delno. I hope you contribute to further painting contests in the future. And third place, to no one's surprise, Ox King, a regular in our contests. Fantastic style that he has throughout his whole Stormhost. He loves chopping up bits of ghosts and slapping them on Stormcast, or bits of endless spells, and he just adds this heavenly fire to everything, and it just looks awesome. And his Gardas model is no exception. Replacing his cloak with this like burning mantle, adding additional flame patches onto the hammer coming down to give it look like he's descending from the heavens and just burning the atmosphere on his way in. Just oozes style. I love everything Ox King does, and I'm not even upset that he's a regular placement in our contest. So
skull and his armor.
Yep, little bits here and there. He's replaced the helmet. I don't think that's Gardas' original helmet.
I think that's a protector helmet.
Yeah.
Or a liberator helmet, like from the. I think it's a liberator helmet from the multi-part kit.
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I don't think it's protector. I could be wrong though. Hard to tell. Maybe Judicator.
Could be.
I think it might be Skybolt Judicator.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks great. His style is really. It's not like the kind of painter that you see on Instagram that spends hundreds of hours on a single model getting all the edges and gradients and everything right, but he goes for style over technique, I think, and it just looks great every time. His colors are on point, the lighting's on point, everything like composition wise looks really good. So very well done, Ox King, my dude. You are killing it. Just keep making Stormcast, please. Don't make any more Nurgle. I've seen your Instagram. I know you're doing Nurgle and Nighthaunt and other things. Just ignore all that. Make more Stormcast, please. And our second place is this really cool custom base kit bastion to make him more edgy, literally. You can see, I'm not sure why there's so much edge on this dude, but it looks cool. He's got like bits of chain, he's got larger spikes, he's got rough terrain, like a custom built base, like everybody always uses Bastion's base, which does look really cool. It's a nice sculpted base. But this is awesome. You can even see the stone in the back, like it's just jutting out. There's just a lot to like about this one.
He did some resin for water effect too, even. Like, oh man.
Oh yeah, he has.
Yeah, he has some resin work there. Like, I like that a lot of people will often make the resin work like the centerpiece of the piece, like instead of it being an accent like here.
Nope.
Sorry about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, he used the resin as an accenting piece, right? Adding to the composition rather than being a like highlight of everything. Yeah. Oh, you can see my dog food there. Yeah, it looks like is this like a Celestial Vindicators kind of thing? Like he's like edgy, or like they're more about the vengeance of things?
I think it might be a custom storm host. You're seeing like a green cape. You know, there's a lot of like chaos warping. There's a lot of chaos. If you see his hammer, it's got a bit of a chaos blade warp towards the back.
A spike.
Yeah, I like it.
He's also got what look like bones up at the center of the crest.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. It's really, really good. Like it's like a really like someone who's been fighting in the realm of chaos for a while and got their armor warped a little or their weapons warped a little.
I don't know if that's
interesting concept.
I don't know if that's canon. I don't know if
no, it doesn't have to be, but yeah, it's probably not canon, but yeah.
I don't think it's possible for Stormcast armor to be influenced by chaos, but it looks cool, so why not? Let's go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. There's nothing but really cool here.
Look at all the chains and everything around it too. Like the base chains, everything just looks awesome. Maybe this is like the 8 points or one of the realm gates near the 8 points. I don't know. It tells a story though, just these extra little bits here and there.
This was Bastion's teenage years.
Dude, there's not enough black.
Yeah, what if he was like because you can have different colored armor within each storm host, right? Like you don't have to be gold within Hammers of Sigmar. There's some chambers that have black armor. Like isn't Neve's chamber, the Shadow Hammers, aren't they black armored Hammers of Sigmar? Am I wrong about that?
I don't think
I'd have to ask Metroid. I don't remember.
Yeah, for real, ask Matt.
When in doubt, ask Matt. Yeah. All right, and on to our first place. We have Andreas SCE, who has definitely placed before in our contests, and this is no exception. His Bastion is spectacular. He's got this great color scheme where he does all this beautiful work on the armor, makes it look like polished cobalt. He does fantastic non-metallic gold. He does excellent cream-colored cloth. The transitions between all of these are very smooth. He takes the time to make sure that colors don't bleed onto each other. He's got this like ceramic-looking weapon thing going on, which is really cool. Yeah, fantastic all around. Love his work. Love to see more of it.
Yeah. This one definitely hits me with almost like a less is more vibe, where like it's very straightforward, right? There's not like a lot of conversion. Like he added that kind of rock piece to the base to elevate him, but it's not necessarily like super stylized. It's just a really good looking, like rock feature, and I really appreciate that here. In that, like I said, it's just like a less is more, right? Like everything is it just looks right. Like even just the fire coming out of the little skull lantern. It's just really well done. Really, like you can see it happening, right? You can see this image happening, which is my favorite part.
I love the smooth transition of purple from this really dark recessed into a very vibrant, rich royal purple on the cloak. I think that looks really well done. He pushed the color really high without breaking his gradient, which is really nice. Yeah, really well done. Great color scheme too. I love seeing this every time. The little edge highlights on the gems, like if you look at his gem on the weapon, that's really well highlighted. Everything is just great. It even looks like if you look at the like hammer symbol above his head, that looks like there's a light shining across it in a very particular way. He's taken care to make sure of that. Like he could have just done it symmetrically, right? But he actually cared to have a little bit higher light point than a little bit lower on the other side. Yeah, he's really thought this through. My only criticism is his base on that cork, if it is cork. But like just add a little bit of texture, kind of just to blend it in there, because like you can see a very like the difference.
There's
between...
a very distinct threshold. Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah, there's not very much transition going on. I thought you were gonna say a black rimmed base, but
no, bases come in all sizes and colors. I don't mind as long as they're clean. You know, you guys know I like a clean rim job.
Clean base. That's fair.
That's all we're going to say about that. And thank you very much, Andreas. Congratulations, my dude. I look forward to finding out what prize you pick and what you do with it, because you're a fantastic painter and love having you enter into our contests. So on that topic, regarding the next painting contest, I think what we discussed, because the holidays are coming up and it's a hectic time, I think we're actually going to take a break in December. And we will start up our painting contests again in January. We are looking for feedback on what models you guys would like to paint for contests. We like to switch it up, you know, 1 unit, 1 regiment, 1 unit, or single model followed by like a regimented unit. So something like Grand Hammers or Liberators, or we switch it up back and forth. So if you guys have suggestions on what you'd like to see in the painting contests, feel free to either, you know, leave a comment here or pop in our Discord and let us know there.
Yeah, we have a whole suggestions channel.
Yes, we do.
Always open to it.
And it's usually just people asking for new emojis, but that's okay too.
We've added quite a bit. I'm pretty happy. App is Wrong is probably my favorite one, but you know.
That is a good one. Yeah. Ooh, what if it's not Stormcast? What if our next painting contest
that would be interesting.
I don't know if that's canon. I don't think we can do it.
We'll talk about
Treason. Treason.
Drop the suggestions. We'll consider everything.
Yeah. Vigilor's time. Ooh. Yeah, with the Battle Force.
That's true, Battle Force.
That's a good suggestion.
We have done dragon.
Does it have to actually be a Vigilor? Could it be a Vigilor converted into a long strike?
I'm fine with that. I'm completely okay with that.
If we do like Vigilor's Judicators, that'd be kind of a neat, like a slash.
We had some really cool entries that we didn't have enough room for our honorable mentions here. But like there were some people that were putting in custom kit bashed, like counts as Bastion, or one guy had like a Bastion converted into a Lord Arcanum that I really liked. So yeah, that's fine. Awesome. That's totally fine. People can do that. So as long as it's recognizable as like a Vigilor or a Vigilor converted into something else, either one works for me. I don't know anybody that would do this model converted into a Vigilor. I think it's always going to be the other way around.
The other way around.
Because why would you?
Now, man, look, new book comes out.
Stormcast on hard mode.
3.5.
Yeah, we're waiting for 3.5. White Dwarf update, whatever, we'll take it. Vigilors, Vigilors go to 30 inches, -2 rend. Kind of thing.
Yeah, why not?
They just suddenly got like ridiculously strong forearms and just ripping back,
All of them get, great bows, like just to become Night Judicators. Oh man. I thought that was interesting how they named it the Night Judicator, but we're going to like Vigilors compared to... Anyways, sorry, Thunderstrike. That's weird.
The naming conventions are all over the place, man. Oh well. It feeds into the conspiracy theory that they're going to phase out the old stuff, right?
Yeah.
Someday.
Maybe we'll get the Primaris treatment at some point. All right. Let's move into our main topic. This one has been requested ever since we showed off radar charts in the Discord a while back, and then we showed them off on our... What video was that? What Makes an Army Fast? We did a live stream about that, and we've kind of just been teasing this, but we've been doing this behind the scenes for a while. We make these kind of faction identity charts for every army. So I guess we'll start off by describing what is faction identity, because we started out kind of with just having radar charts, and we're like, well, what do we call this? Like, what's the goal with this sort of thing? And what we landed on is faction identity. It's not necessarily a numerical breakdown of crunching numbers point by point. It's more like, what is this army really well known for? If you are somebody who has never picked up a dice in Age of Sigmar before, picked up a dice. That's not an expression. If you've never played the game before and you're looking what army to get to, and like the models looking cool is one thing, but you're also interested in from in terms of gameplay. Well, how does this faction play? Like, typically, it's how the models look, but not always, right? And it's like, well, you know, this army looks like it would be good at shooting, but how good is it really compared to other armies? And this army looks like it would be fast, but how fast is it really? Like Nighthaunt kind of look like they'd be a really fast army, given that they're all disembodied ghosts, right? But in actuality, they're kind of a slow army. So yeah, what is faction identity? It is a way to examine faction strengths and weaknesses. Hopefully this is useful for new players to quickly learn and define what makes an army. And it's really best defined by giving examples. So Stormcast are slow and elite, but they're also very powerful. They do a lot of damage and durable. While other factions may have more models, they may be faster, they might do less damage in melee and shooting, and they might take more damage than we do. So that's the bare, simplest example possible. And then let's say Ironjawz. They're fast and powerful. They arguably are better in melee than Stormcast. They're way faster, maybe the fastest army in the game, but they don't have any ranged power. And there's always this balancing act with every faction. Every faction has strengths and weaknesses, and it's really easy to see the strengths, and it's not so easy to see the weaknesses. And how do we... Oh, and Daughters of Khaine, of course. They're super fragile, right? But they have maybe the best melee damage in the game, and their prayers are awesome. Even though their spellcasting might not be as good as something like Tzeentch or Lumineth, they have really good prayers, and they rely on those prayers as well. So there's all kinds of different categories, and we'll break those down in just a second here. So how do we quantify it? Because obviously that's what we do on this channel. We just love numbers and categories and classifications. That's what we do. So first off, we have to pick a bunch of attributes. We have to break down how things that are common to every army and varying degrees, and then we rank them. And we looked at all the factions that have a 3rd edition Battletome, and we compared them to each other. And and then we went through it multiple times. We said, well, we gave this faction, a 4 out of 5, but maybe after looking at the rest of them, maybe they're like a 3, or maybe they're like a 2 or something. I don't know. But it's not a scientific measurement. I can't stress this enough. This is not based off crunching numbers. This is not... we have a spreadsheet and we've calculated the average damage of every unit, and therefore this is the number for that army. This is more based on game feel. Like when you play against Stormcast Eternals, does it feel like they do good melee damage? Does it feel like they have a fast army that's engaging you on turn 1 every time? Does it feel like they have good shooting? That's the kind of thing we're going for with these measurements. And I will stress again that we only looked at armies that have a 3rd edition Battletome. We did not look at things like Seraphon or Caradron Overlords or what's another one? We did look at Soulblight. Yeah, Core and Slaanesh are excluded because they just don't have 3rd edition Battletomes yet, and the difference in terms of flavor and identity from 2nd edition Battletomes to 3rd is huge, right? They are nailing 3rd edition Battletomes. I can't stress enough how good 3rd edition feels compared to 2nd edition. For people like Dan, you just recently started playing Age of Sigmar, and our buddy James, who's a regular on the show, he just started playing at the very end of 2nd edition, and like I can't explain to people just how abysmal the end of 2nd edition felt. Everybody was doing infinity damage, everybody was teleporting, defense almost didn't matter, it was just about disposable screens. Armies were either auto-casting 4 spells a turn, or they were just not casting anything and they just ignored it. Everybody was fighting first and fighting twice. It was just awful. And in 3rd edition, they have peeled that all way back. And because of that, the armies that still do things like army-wide run and charge like Daughters of Khaine, or everything can retreat and charge like Nighthaunt, or half the army can deploy in reserve like Stormcast, those things feel more special because other armies aren't doing them anymore. So although it might make sense for Nighthaunt to have half their army in reserve like Stormcast, the fact that Stormcast have that aspect and Nighthaunt can only put 3 units in reserve gives more distinct niches and identity, and it feels really good. The game feels really good. I can say that for sure. Mm-hmm. And the last note here is that we did not consider seasonal rules. We wanted this to be season agnostic, where we're looking at the battle tomes and maybe some basic idea of what battle plans look like. It's hard to say because all the battle plans change every season. We're not playing the same 12 battle plans for 6 months at a time. But there's still general things of like, well, this is how you control objectives usually, right? They might totally change some of these things. We can't really predict that. But stuff like bounty hunters or hunters of the heartland, these seasonal rules, those are gone. They're not coming back. So we're not going to consider them. So this is core rules and battle tomes, pretty much.
I'm looking at it here, you can see it goes from a 0 to a 5. And a 0 is basically, they don't have this, right? So some armies, like you can see our example here for Nurgle, have 0 prayers, right? One is that they have it. It may not be the most core to their identity. It's something that they do, but it's not core to their gameplay. It's not core to what they do. 2 is that they have it, and it can be strong, but it's also, again, not something that they rely on heavily.
Yeah, like you could play without it and still be fine.
Yeah. 3 is definitely, it's now core to the identity. It may not be super duper strong. Like, it may be the best way that they do damage, for example, like with Nurgle here, and it may not be like a crazy amount like a 5. A 4 is, it's core and it's very strong. They have different ways of doing damage. They have tricks, if you will, or there's just a lot of damage, for example.
4 is like, this is what you start to identify the army with. It's like a central feature of the army that compared to other armies just don't do this thing, right?
And then a 5 is best in class, right?
Yeah.
Like this is their thing.
5's the gold standard. If you're a 5, you're the best in the game at it, period. Like, you can debate about which armies are 5 and which are like 4.5, but like 5 is like gold star. That's the best.
They do this really well for whatever reason.
Yeah. And so the categories here, we actually had a lot more, and we had to kind of combine a few of them. So let's go over what we have, and then we'll go through every faction one at a time. But I just kind of want to lay this groundwork here. So melee refers to not just the max damage that you can do, because armies like Bonesplitterz can deal really, really high max damage, right? Everything is an exploding 6. They have lots of attacks, lots of models, but their ability to fight, they don't have the ability to fight first. They don't have bonus pile-in distance. They don't have charge mortal wounds. They don't make you fight first or fight last. Like, these are all rolled into the melee category. So how well your faction excels at melee. Sometimes, like with Stormcast, we'll talk about in a second, we just do so much damage that we get a 4 in melee, while another faction could do the same amount of damage. Another faction could do less damage, but they could have more tricks. They could have, like, fight first. They could have all kinds of interesting mechanics that they can deal with. Whereas ranged is kind of the other side of the coin as well. Rather than doing damage in melee, how are you doing damage from range? We refer to this often as ranged power projection. It's not just missile weapons, but it's like any damage you can do to reach past the front line that your opponent will put in your way. So, for example, Ironjawz have almost no range. I think we give them like a 0.5 in range, and that's because they just hit things. They charge into them and they kill them through melee. That's how they do things. Magic is like a combination of how well you do at something and how reliant you are at that magic as well. And it also includes, I don't think we listed it here, but we do consider how well you are at countering enemy magic. So, for example, if you are Fyreslayers, they have no wizards, so they would get a 0 naturally, but they do have that 4+ spell artifact that makes everything around the battlesmith ignore spells. So that is considered, so they get a little bit of a point in there, just to kind of give an idea that there is something going on in this faction, even though they don't have wizards. Prayers are kind of the other side of the coin, how reliant you are on prayers and how good you are at using those prayers, how impactful the prayers are, stuff like that. Speed and mobility, we've kind of talked about these on a live stream before. Speed is the distance you can move or charge. It's like your ability to go from point A to point B. Bonuses to movement, run in charge goes in here, 3d6 charges, all these sorts of things are considered.
Pre-game moves even.
Pre-game moves are a big one, yep. Typically, speed and aggression tend to go together. We actually had a category for how aggressive an army wanted to be, and we thought that didn't really make sense as a ranking system. It's like, well, how are Ironjawz more aggressive than Bonesplitterz, for example? It's like, no, they're both equally aggressive, and like, which is aggression 5 or is aggression a 1? Like, it didn't really make sense. It's just like, because you can also play it totally differently. You could play a cagey Bonesplitterz style, so we dropped that one eventually. But yeah, pre-game moves are really important. They definitely count into your speed tactic, their category. Mobility is a different thing than speed. Speed is how far you move. Mobility is how freely you move. So if you have things like flying or teleporting or reserve deployments or retreating and charging, all of these get factored into mobility. It's your ability to freely move about the battlefield. So the best example here is Nighthaunt have a really high mobility score, but a really low speed score. They are a slow army, 8 inches across the board pretty much, but they have a really high mobility score because they're so hard to pin down. Ironjawz are the opposite. Once Ironjawz engage, they're stuck in. They're not going anywhere. But they are super fast. They can charge you from across the table. Defense is a bit of a misnomer, just a little bit, because it's not just your ability to... It's not just saves. Wards are not considered here. Defense is your ability to mitigate incoming damage. So sometimes that does include saves. So like Stormcast have a really high defense score, partially because we have really good saves and we have save bonuses. We have the best save stacking in the game, without a doubt. Hit, wound, rend debuffs, things that can reduce enemy accuracy are counted here. If you have bodyguards to protect key units, like Nighthaunt would get a high defense score because they have spirit hosts protecting their units. Avoiding damage is the name of the game with defense. Whereas... going down a bit here, wounds is how much damage it takes to kill you. And that's where wards come into play, because as we discussed in our Mortal Wounds 101 video, which I will add to the show notes probably, wards are just effective health. If you have a 5-up ward on a 10 wound model, that model effectively has 15 wounds. It's a dice game, right? It's not the same thing, but it's basically the same thing. So if you have an army that has 6+ saves, but you have 5+ wards, well, you'd have a low defense score and a high wound score, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And sustain is your ability to take a hit and then recover from it. So Stormcast, for example, have almost no sustain. We have Call for Aid to revive 1 unit of Redeemers, really poor healing. We don't revive models and slain units. We don't have really bonuses to rally. We don't have any summoning. All of these things are sustain, your ability to add more wounds throughout the game. And the last category is models, which is pretty straightforward, but it's a little more involved than just the straight amount of models you have. It's also your ability to just control space on the board. So Gargants, for example, are a 1, not just because they have like the lowest model count in the game, but also because they just have trouble controlling board space. Everything has to engage, and they can't just like leave stuff behind typically. It's a very expensive thing for them to do. So that stuff all gets rolled into models. So, with all that out of the way, just an info dump, let's start with Stormcast. That's the army we are most familiar with, and I will say we're probably biased in everything we say because we look at this through a Stormcast lens, but we tried to be as objective as possible. And what we came up with is that Stormcast are a good melee army, but much better. I think we're the best shooting army in the game. Our damage is exceptionally high. We have really good accuracy, good ranges. What puts us over the edge compared to something like Daughters of Khaine, which have the double tap, which is really scary. What makes Stormcast the best shooting army, I think, is that we teleport and we can come out of reserve. And those two things make our shooting the best in the game.
Yeah, we can keep our shooting safe. So we're just very efficient with our shooting. We can make our shooting stretch that extra mile. Thunderbolt Volley is great, even though it's nerfed. It's still a great way. It makes our shooting strong in that we can set ourselves up by shooting something out before movement phase, which is a big deal, and people don't realize that shooting is after movement. So being able to do that is super huge for us, as well as the ability to keep our shooting safe, put our shooting where we need it to be, apply pressure. It's strange because you would think of like something like KO as being like the gold standard 5 like star shooting army, but even their shooting is somewhat more vulnerable than ours can be.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit of a difference. And then melee we're 4 because fulminators are really strong, and general grand hammers, we have really strong options, but we're just nowhere, like, even though we have very high damage, we obviously don't deal as much damage as Witch Elves, for example, and we don't have a lot of shenanigans. We can't
we don't have like the double fight of Chosen or anything like that really just like just really enhances their damage output by a lot. We just have straightforward, honest, good damage. So
Kazarol says, teleport and shooting, Stormcast are the best Caradron unit in the game.
Hey Ben, you can still teleport with Doc, you just, no one plays teleport anymore.
Yeah, maybe they should. Maybe there's a room for it. No, Marathi has to get nerfed first.
People do. No, I think people do. There's some lists that really like running Marathi and the 15 Bloodstalker list in Celebron, and for the main reason is that there are some maps where Marathi and the Blood Snakes are just so far apart that you will probably get hit before you can hit them. Mm-hmm. Especially against something like Stormcast that can deep strike everywhere. So to offset that, they take Celebron, so they can just teleport them.
Makes sense. Let's look at some more categories here. Stormcast are like a 2 in Magic. They have wizards. Like we have the most wizards in the game in terms of War Scrolls, and I think only one of them has a bonus to casting. Right? It's just Krondys.
Yep.
So like we're not really defined by our wizards by any means. We do use wizards. We like having celestial blades. We like having a knight incantor for a dispel scroll. But if you just didn't have a wizard in a Stormcast army, totally fine, right? And this isn't just about like competitiveness. This is again about game feel. Like you could play an all Vanguard army. You can play you can play so many different kinds of viable things, and Stormcast are just not defined by their magic. It's fine, it's good. We're not very good at it. We have a decent spell lore, and we have one really, really good wizard who defines a list, and that's like a 2, right? Like, if we didn't have Cronbus, we'd probably be a 1.
Just... the strongest spell we have is Mystic Shield, actually. It's not even Celestial Blades, it's Mystic Shield, which is what a lot of people do. Like, even in the, not Garda spam, the Dragon spam list, a Lord Castellant with the Arcane Tome casting Mystic Shield every turn. That's basically what you need.
That is the go-to.
Our best wizards are allies. All of them.
Yes, yeah.
We do get a 2, because we do still have the best, currently best denial for spells in the game.
Yeah, there's, we were complaining that there's going to be a lot of effects like OBR, auto-casting, that we can't unbind. Those are really limited. It's like Techless, OBR, and that's it. I think those are the only things that can say can't be unbound.
Well,
Vesperal Gem and Midnight Tome.
True, yeah, okay. Purple Tome.
There's still other effects,
those effects, though, they're all limited to specific kinds of spells.
Yeah.
So it's either endless spells or a specific lore spell, or the can't be unbound effect then severely hampers their output, like Techless.
Mm-hmm. And we could theoretically bring 5 Knight Incantors if we wanted to, right? Like, we have that option. There's no limit on the Voidstorm Scroll. You can bring as many as you want, up to leader limits. So we do have really good unbinding. But yeah, 2. Once you guys see the rankings for the other armies, this will make sense why Stormcast are a 2 and not maybe like a 3 or something after everything we've said. Speed, Stormcast are slow. There's no way around it. We don't have the ability to clear the table. Before the Draconic Onslaught change, we would have been a 3. I think that would have given us a whole point. Now though, especially after Battle Mage has changed, which I think we're just assuming is going to happen, there's no way Wild Form stays around. It's too good for internal balance reasons, not for external. I think it's totally fine externally. But yeah, Stormcast are pretty slow. We have our hammer units are 4-inch move. They rely on deep strike charges, which are not reliable. We have some 12-inch move units like Chariots and Drakes, but overall, we are a fairly slow army. We're not going to be advancing everything up the board. Turn 1, we want to play slower, and that's okay. But to make up for that speed, we have higher mobility. We have reserve deployments. We have translocation, which is still the best teleportability in the game. My God, how good is translocation after looking at other armies that have to like spend command points or cast spells on a 9 or do all kinds of or like Ironjawz.
I like how they made teleporting and deep striking reserves like a unique core of our identity.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feel very core, like you said, when everyone in 2nd edition could just do it for less of a risk. But now there's like actual risk to other armies doing it. And I hope that they also, for that reason, nerf the Seraphon's free teleport for that the constellation they have.
Yeah.
Do you guys remember when that teleport was a dice roll?
Yeah.
In 1st and 2nd edition, Seraphon had to roll a dice to teleport, I believe. And it was not reliable. And I think that maybe that might come back.
Like I'm okay with it being on a dice roll. I just don't want it to be like, oh, you just get a free teleport on the board. It's not even, you don't need to be near a hero. You can just do it. I don't like that.
Yeah, it felt really bad to play against.
Well, every time we look at a new Battletome, I always say, like, Stormcast just, thematically look better and better because they're stripping away all that 2nd edition bloat. So I think Seraphon are one of the big offenders of this, where they just do everything, man. They just do everything. And it's making everybody look bad.
Well, Robert in the chat said he felt that our vulnerability to mortal wounds, which goes with our next topic, is hard to keep that high defense. And I actually think our defense is definitely a 5. For one, Signs of the Storm is a huge defensive tool for us. We can keep something safe by just not having it on the board. That's a huge defensive tool, as well as even our base units are often on a 3-up, something like Liberators. We're starting to use Vanquishers a little more, but we're able to start off with a good save, which lets us get to higher saves, save stack really well and really efficiently, as well as we have access to several tools to mitigate mortal wounds, whether it's something like the Voidstorm scroll, denying mortal wounds from spells, for example, or just wards, which we talked about in our mortal wounds video, how a ward isn't necessarily a counter to mortal wounds. It's like the best way to deal with them, as far as it's one of the only things you can save against them, if you will. But it's also not necessarily a direct counter, but we are able to handle mortal wounds. It's something that we have, and it definitely deserves a 5. We have the tools for it, and we use them fairly often.
We save stack better than everybody else in the game, partly because of Lord Castellan giving us an additional +1 save that other armies just don't have access to. We'll talk about Slaves to Darkness later, and at first it seemed like Slaves to Darkness was just going to be strictly better than Stormcast at the things Stormcast was good at. But after looking at their defenses, it's like, well, they don't have that Lord Castellan, they don't have that extra +1 save. They can be roared, right? Whereas Stormcast can go Astral Templars and be immune to monstrous rampages entirely. We are just the premier defensive faction. Another thing that goes into defense is having cheap, disposable units that you can just throw in the way. And I think Stormcast do this a lot better than a lot of other armies. For example, if you're playing Nighthaunt, you have to bring a unit like Chain Rasp in order to accomplish the same goal. And Chain Rasp are just like worse than Liberators. Liberators can be revived with Call for Aid. They can fight on death. They can do like a little bit of damage here and there. Whereas Chain Rasp are just a speed bump. Our speed bumps are cheap. They fill battle line. Defense isn't just your save. I would say something like a ward is counts as wounds, while a ward against mortal wounds specifically counts as defense, because in that case you're not just avoiding all wounds, it's avoiding a particular kind of damage. It's hard to understand, I know, but we're being consistent across the board here, trust me. Stormcast definitely the best defensive faction in the game. I think anybody could attest to this. If you've ever played against like 4 Stormdrakes plus Gardas plus Lord Castellan with a Mystic Shield, like that's super hard to kill. Nothing else in the game does that. It's really, really tough. Or like Chariots even, or well, I guess it's more wounds than defense, but I think the only army that comes close to Stormcast, and I think maybe even surpasses it, is Lumineth with all of their buffs up. But that's unreliable, and we'll talk about that. Yeah,
I'll go back to, because Tom's in the chat asked why Stormcast range is 5. Again, Signs of the Storm, really good. We're able to protect our ranged, so it's not just having range power, right? We have really good range power. Our ranged damage is as good as, for example, Daughters of Khaine, KO, even range damage, just because of its accuracy and the ability to apply it, as well as we're able to go the extra mile, right? We talked about 5 including like shenanigans and tricks and things. Us being able to teleport our shooting, keep it safe, and put it where it needs to be, as well as some of the tricks with going into the hero phase shooting, really puts it at a 5, right? Like, we have damage, we have tricks, we have everything right there. I think that there not many other ranged armies in the game can do that besides maybe KO, because they just focus on range so much.
Yeah, it's more than just damage output. We do have really good damage output shooting, and that's part of the reason. But it's application of that damage. Nobody does it like Stormcast does. We do it reliably from anywhere on the table. We can drop into from reserve. We can translocate very reliably. We do it the best, I think. Biased.
It's not about applying like ranged power, right? Because that lasts a bit from 4 to 5. Like, being a 4 is having the damage. Being a 5 is being able to make that damage work for you, and how it works for the army.
I will say the Iron Blasters come close, which is why I think they should at least go up points. Is because I think with a 39-inch effective range, I think they are really like giving Stormcast a run for their money in the range department, which is odd for a destruction faction.
Did we include ogres in this?
No, and the reason for that is it seems pretty close to obvious that their shooting is too efficient.
Yeah, they're definitely 5 right now.
So they are as close to 5 as 5 can be. They have huge threat ranges. They're very durable. They're really, really good. But yeah, Ramon in the chat mentioned, the 30-inch range actually sets us apart from other shooting armies as well. Long strikes, having that huge range is a big deal. Application of damage matters. Footprint matters. Yep. How well you shoot. Yeah. Sustain, Stormcaster are 1. We call for aid, and that's it. We don't really heal. We don't really revive models, something like that. In terms of wounds, I think without Gardas in the army, we would be like a 2 on wounds. Like, we're not a high wound army because you can go super elite. You can go like the Annihilana Grande list with Grand Hammers,
Yeah,
long
it's like
strikes.
86 wounds or something.
Right, like it doesn't take a lot of damage to kill a Stormcast army. But if you have a Gardas in there giving you a 50% modifier, that suddenly is good. So I think that bumps us up a point up to 3. And then in terms of models, like, we're pretty elite. We don't really run 30 blocks of dudes. Sometimes we run 15 Judicators. Sometimes we run squads of 3, sometimes squads of 5, sometimes squads of 2 or 4. So we're elite, but not as elite as Gargants. I think Gargants are the one, and everything is measured up from there. So if you're curious as a new player, Stormcast have the largest faction, most war scrolls, which is good and bad. We can deploy half our army in reserve, drop in anywhere. We can bring tons of ally choices. Cities of Sigmar is a viable option in Stormkeep armies. Big armor, big weapons, and dragons. Like, that's Stormcast flavor in a nutshell.
Arcanums are kind of sustained. Arcanums are, I don't know if I'd go. Ramon in the chat was talking about taking a bunch of Arcanums. I'm like, no, not really.
No.
Not at all.
Well, that's why, and that's I was responding to, because the issue with it is that the Arcanum's effect, as written in the book, is obnoxiously good, which is why it got errata, right?
Yeah.
So now
they're just not worth it for their points.
Yeah,
From one cast wizards with a niche ability like that, they are just not worth it. Like, how much is the Chaos Sorcerer Lord?
Now I don't know.
What is it, like 135?
135?
Yeah, 135. Like, I don't know. All the Arcanums need to be like 20 points cheaper. They're just not worth it.
No.
Like, they're built to be like these battle mages, like these warrior wizards, but they're not good at the warrior part, and they're not good at the wizard part. So, like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, we'll definitely do a video talking about that, I think. Talking about some Stormcast changes.
We will.
Yeah.
Look forward to that.
For the internal balance.
We totally didn't just do this chart so it could look like a lightning bolt, by the way. It just looks like a lightning bolt. It just is what it is.
It used to have a lot more categories, and after we trimmed them down, we were like, huh, look at that. All right. Next up, let's talk. We're just going to do this like Grand Alliance and then by order of release. So Idoneth Deepkin with the second order army to come out, so we're going to talk about them next. Idoneth, they are a very fast flying cavalry army that is hard to pin down. They have glass cannon infantry that just does blender levels of damage. They can rip apart a lot of stuff. Aesthetically, they're shipwrecks, sharks, eels, and turtles. You know, they've got that Tides of Death thing that gives them really powerful army-wide bonuses. And that works for and against them, because when you play against the Tides, you really suffer. If you don't do what the Tides want you to do, you're going to have a hard time. But when you play into them, your opponent kind of knows you're playing into them. So it's a double-edged sword. They have good shooting. They still rely on their melee. They're fragile, like pretty fragile. Like there's more fragile armies, but this one just takes a lot of damage, and their magic's not so great. But let's look at all the categories here. So we gave them a melee score of a 4, which is the same as Stormcast. And the reason for that is, even though Idoneth do, less damage overall in melee, like compare that to 4 Fulminators or Grand Hammered Strikes, or even Vanquishers chopping up stuff are pretty good. Idoneth are not a super high damage army, and we talked about this with on our How to Counter Idoneth episode. They're not a high damage army, but they have a lot of tricks that they can do. Army-wide fight first is really useful. Their application of melee damage is really, really good, because they can just be where they need to be due to their speed. So they still feel like an army that is defined by their melee damage, and it is a threat. When you play against Idoneth, you're a lot more worried about their melee than you are against their range. And their damage is still good, even though it's not, maybe the highest damage in the game, which will be one of the next ones here. Their range damage is good too. It's respectable.
Yeah.
Super high threat ranges. I think that's what props it up from like a 3 to a 3.5, is that sharks can't be avoided. Whatever sharks want to shoot, they will shoot, because they have a 14-inch flying move and then like a 24-inch threat range on the gun. Like, that's insane.
Yep.
That's so insane. Turtles are the same thing.
Turtles not much worse.
Yep. So they have good
and
shooting.
Reavers are fine too.
Yep.
Like, they're shooting infantry Reavers. You can deep strike them with a Soul Scryer and a board edge. They move 8. They can fire 18 away. It's pretty good.
Yeah. So they're a good shooting army. No doubt about that. I don't think you can make just a pure shooting Idoneth list. I think you still need melee. You have to play into the Tides. But they are a good shooting army. They're competent at it. Their magic, on the other hand, is not so good. They don't really have like the best spell lore. There's no spells you want to, like, you can just ignore wizards in this army and do just fine, right? If the only wizard you bring is an Achelian King with Flaming Weapon and an Arcane Tome, that's fine.
Yeah, but the like infinite casting.
Well, until you
is
run
a
out of
lot.
spells, right? So
Yeah.
this aspect of the sea definitely gives them a bump. But even then, it's just re-rolling spells. It doesn't have any bonuses to cast. So, and you need to roll a 7+ on that ability. So, like, I don't think Magic defines this army, and I think
it is good.
They're even a little bit worse at it than Stormcast are, I would say, because we got Krondys, we've got Celestial Blades is an easy cast. These guys are trying to cast some harder spells, and they're not as impactful even when they get those spells off.
Yep.
Yeah, their spells are all like super low range. The only spells worth casting, I think, are the ones like the Tsunami of Terror, which is a War Scroll spell for the Eidolon.
That
None
really
of the
just
other spells are.
given that it's a 12-inch range, it's really just a melee enhancement, right? So
Yeah, I mean that's what they do. They take the Steed of Tides, which is their teleport spell, but it's only for the caster, and then they cast the Tsunami of Terrors to get it. Basically, that's their combo.
yeah, you play against Idoneth, you're not worried about their magic. That's not a concern for you.
And if anything, they're really weak to magic because they don't even mostly bring mages sometimes.
Oh yeah, their Tide of their Forgotten Nightmares doesn't work against ranged magic. So if you have Tzeentch, you can snipe out their main heroes pretty easily.
Yep. Prayers, I think people forget that they have a priest. The Soul Scryer is a priest. There is no prayer lore, there is no War Scroll prayer, but he has the priest keyword. So in theory, after the Deep Strike turn where he comes into play, the following hero phase, he could smite an enemy priest. Or he could bless, not even himself, because he has a 5-up board. He could, no,
You curse.
he can curse, yeah, he can curse, I guess, if you're within 9. But
If something was dumb enough to walk within 9, sure, I guess he could first. But yeah.
Yep. So they have a prayer. Speed. Idoneth are fast. They're one of the fastest armies in the game. They're up there. I think the only reason we didn't rank them a 5 is because even, like, in order for them to count as a 5, you would have to have a full army of eels and sharks, and I don't think that's usually what people do these days. They mix in Reavers and Namarti and things like that.
But they're very fast.
They're a fast army, yeah.
Don't underestimate them because there's like they have the run and charge tied on turn 2. If they're Iron Rat, they can essentially on demand run and charge on any cavalry unit in the game that they have.
Yeah.
Sharks, sharks, eels, what have you. So don't underestimate their speed. They even have rituals that further increase their run and charge rolls, plus the Hornblower. So they can be on the turn that they run and charge, they can be +2 to a run and +2 to a charge.
Yeah.
Which is pretty damn amazing. And yeah, so they're a fast army. It's just probably not as fast as, say, a double moving Maw Crusher.
Yep.
Well, that's the gold standard, right?
That's the gold standard. Spoilers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of mobility, they're pretty good. They've got a lot of flying units. They can come in from reserve. They have that option. Even if it's not the most efficient option, they have that. They can retreat and charge using the tides, potentially, right? If that comes up, either reverse tide against a pinning tactic, or round 4, if you're still on the table after that, they can retreat and charge. So they're not like super easy to pin down. They're not as mobile as, say, Nighthaunt, which just always retreat and charge, but they're certainly more mobile than a lot of other armies.
Mm-hmm.
Especially flying over stuff with huge, like when you have high movement and flying, that's really good. That's a great
You can't
combo.
leave gaps in your line because if you leave a gap wide enough, some eels can land in there and just mess you up.
Mm-hmm.
Benjamin asks, the fastest faction, Lumineth or Ironjawz?
It's gotta be Ironjawz.
Gotta be Ironjawz. Lumineth have
Ironjawz.
Lumineth have the potential for the single fastest moving unit in the game, which is a speed of Hish on a wind spirit, but they're a slow army. Despite that potential, they are a slow army. They don't move up the board very quickly.
Who's putting speed? Okay, never mind.
Hey, it can matter. There's battle tactics.
You put it on Sephiroth and you want to touch everything. Everything.
I guess.
But you can only do mortals to one unit, though, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So this is looking at it as a faction, not just individual units. This is about faction identity, not about single units in an army. Defense. Idoneth just take hits. And that's why in our video on how to counter them, we recommend to just be as aggressive as possible. Their ability to avoid shooting on the first turn is really good, very cool. There's ways to play around it, and if they get hit in melee before high tide, man, they just crumble. This is an army that really struggles to avoid taking damage. They can avoid getting shot, but they can't avoid magic. They're a fragile army. sustain. They don't really have any ways to revive models en masse. They can't revive slain models. The only reason we really gave them a 1 is because the Soul Render exists, and there are builds with Idoneth that you can just revive a lot of Namarti Thralls every single turn, or Reavers if you're doing that. So that gives them a point. Otherwise, I think they would have been a 0. There's no bonuses to rally. They don't even have good bravery for heroic recovery. Benjamin, like in the chat, Slaanesh should be the fastest faction. When they get a 3rd edition Battletome, we're going to add them to the ranking, and it's a good argument for why Slaanesh should be 5.
Yeah.
Wounds. Idoneth are a relatively high wound army. They're about equal to Stormcast. The 5-up ward across the Namartis with the boat and the heroes with the 5-up ward. I think these little things add up. They're not like the problem with them is they just take too much damage. Whereas Stormcast, we have the same amount of wounds roughly in our lists. We can just avoid the damage a lot better than Idoneth can. They struggle with that sort of thing. And then in terms of model counts, Idoneth definitely feel like a step above Stormcast in that respect.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
They're a step above, but they're still actually, this tome actually made them fairly elite. I remember when I played second edition IDK when they got those Broken Realm upgrades, it just seemed like they had too much on the board for how much efficiency they were getting, and it seems like they finally normalized that to where they're elite, and they do kind of elite level damage.
I think Eels went up like 60 points or something, right? Something crazy.
Yeah,
everything. Eels went up 60, I think. The Sharks used to be like 110, 120, something insane, and then they went up to 165. Their points went up massively. Like I used to fight second edition IDK with Stormcast. I'm like, I can't beat this. I just don't have the tools, and you're way too efficient. You're more efficient than I am with all the rerolls and everything.
Yeah.
So they normalized that, so it's good.
But that's not to say that they can't have a lot of bodies on the board.
Oh, I mean, obviously. I mean, it's like we could build a 90 Vindictor list, or whatever, but it's not a good one. They could. I mean, don't get me wrong. Their thing is their horde armies are actually somewhat better than ours, I would say, sometimes. Thralls are a scary unit. It's just that Bounty Hunters is holding them back. So they can go a bit hordy now that we're going to move out of that era. But yeah.
To answer Robert a little bit, hopefully we can clarify that speed, we're also talking the whole faction. He was talking about how Ironjawz is only moving 3 units that fast, and we'll talk about it sure when we get there, but it's also that's the core to their play style. That is literally how they have to play. And also those 3 units is 60% of the army, right? You've got 2 6 blocks of pigs and a Maw Crusher coming at you. It's quite a lot of your army that can move that fast.
Mm-hmm.
Core to the identity. But we'll talk about it more for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to Fyreslayers that came out at the same time as the Idoneth. Again, their melee feels good, and it's a little weird that we put, there's no differentiation in the melee power. It's just how the sorting came out. Trust me, it'll be a lot more obvious in melee power. But they do feel like a 4 in melee. They do really high melee damage, especially when they're, double reinforced poleaxes are whipping you in the face for 12, 15 mortal wounds before you have a chance to fight them. They're a prominent melee army. Maggotkin are no slouches in combat. They definitely rely on it, and they are good at it as well. There's no doubt about that. Their ranged, on the other hand, took a big hit from their second edition book, which is probably fine, because if you had to distinguish in terms of identity Fyreslayers from Kharadron, it's Kharadron should be the shooting ones and Fyreslayers should be the melee ones. Seems obvious. But they have some shooting, right? Maggotkin can breathe fire. They have their incantations, whatever they're called. Invocations, that's it, thank you. And they still have Orc Hearthguard that are putting out a little bit of damage while they're bodyguarding, so they have some range power, but nothing really significant. They struggle to get into range. It's often shorter ranges, things like that. They have a Spell Ignore banner. That's the reason why they have a 1 in Magic. I guess you can take an Arcane Tome, technically, but everybody can, so that doesn't really mean anything. They don't have a Spell Lord, they don't have Wizards, but they have decent anti-magic. But prayers. This faction loves prayers. They have really good prayers. They have really good priests. They are high impact prayers, and they love using them, and they want as many as they can get. This is one of the de facto armies that's defined by prayers.
They actually use invocations.
Yes, they have 3 invocations, and they're relatively all good. They're not. None of them are just atrocious.
Yeah.
This is definitely a prayer melee army if you had to put those things together. But they're slow, right? They're not. They're dwarves, right? Best case scenario, they get to run 6 and then charge after a 4-inch move with a +2 on their rune. But a lot of these things have to line up in order to do that. Maggotkin are somewhat speedy. But overall, Fyreslayers are not known for their speed. They are a slow army, one of the slower ones, about as fast as Stormcast, really. They have some faster units, but they're still held back by their 4-inch move heroes and infantry. And in mobility, unlike Stormcast, Fyreslayers are not very mobile. Once they get stuck in, they are stuck in, and that's it. There's no retreating out of combat. In fact, some of their units aren't allowed to retreat. I think if like the Battlesmith dies, you can't retreat anymore or something. So yeah, the only reason they have a point in mobility at all is because they have the ability to tunnel one unit into play for each Runesmiter that you bring. So that you could build a list that has like a couple of these guys, but that's it. That's about all they got going in terms of mobility. There's nothing flying. There's nothing reserved. There's one unit in reserve, let's say on average. There's no teleporting, so they're not a mobile army. Defense. The ability to avoid damage. So this might be a little odd that an army with 5-up save infantry counts as a 4 in defense, but they have good wards, which can help. They have ways to ignore spells. They have the ability. I think what really puts them up is the fight first thing. I think that is a fantastic defensive tool where you get charged, and if it's not a monster that roared you, you just slap it first, and that is avoiding a lot of damage. So I think they, combine that with their sustain being they have a 4+ rally on these infantry units, and safe stacking magma drops. When you combine these two things together, they're a pretty durable army. It's not trivial to take Fyreslayers off the table. You have to fully wipe every single unit, otherwise they just start rallying back on a 4+. So
it's easy for them to remove out of range so they can rally.
Yeah,
for sure. And then once you get in melee, they fight first. So like, it's tough. It's a tough nut to crack, which feels right. This like defensive, fire-focused melee army, that feels right for Fyreslayers. Wounds. They have a bunch of wounds. Volkite Berserkers are 20 wounds for 170 points. You've got Magma Droths being big wound blocks. They've got wards on top of that. There's a lot of 6+ wards. There's 4+ wards on some units. There's 5+ wards across the army with the Battlesmith. They are a high wound army. You got to do a lot of damage to take everything off the table. And then in terms of model count, about average, right? They're not too high, about the same as Idoneth. They bring some elites, some centerpiece models like Magma Droths mixed in with some infantry. You can go really elite, like Gargant level elite with this army if you wanted to. If you wanted to just bring all Magma Droths,
which is a good list.
I don't recommend it. I think support heroes are useful in this army. They're really good. Rune Smiters and Rune Fathers are really good, but you can go super elite if you want to. So in terms of fluff, flavor, they are warrior monks in pursuit of Urgold, which is like, Urgold is their god fought a big lizard and they killed each other and they fused together, and then I'm not selling this well.
Scattered all over.
Yeah. So anyway, their dead god. They're finding all this gold because they want to resurrect their dead god. So they are mercenaries. They'll fight for chaos. They'll fight for death. They don't care as long as they can get that sweet Urgold. Generally, they are order aligned, but if the opportunity calls for it, they'll betray order, no problem.
They have done it. I think Oleander made them do it.
Yeah. Give them enough Urgold and they'll do anything. They are definitely slayers, right? They, from Warhammer Fantasy, slayers are they want to die because I think it's like because they committed some grave sin and they're trying to atone for it by dying through combat. And that definitely, you feel that here, where you have this berserker faction that's like inspiring each other from death. So they got that going on, and it is a mix of fury and flames, which actually I don't think the second edition book did that justice. The Magma Droths were not a significant part of the army, but now they are, and it's fantastic. Fyreslayers are fun. Go ahead.
This one we definitely tried to make it into an axe. Everything we just talked about doesn't mean anything. This is an axe.
That's all you need.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that. It looks like a pickaxe. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Are we just like cloud gazing at this point, just like seeing what we want to see, ink blot test kind of thing? It does look like a Volkite axe, though. I gotta give that to you.
Yeah, that's what I said. The pickaxe.
Yeah. This next one, though, I can't see anything here.
Something. I don't know. Dan, run us through this one while I get some water.
Yeah, man. Daughters of Khaine. Well, it's our cult of murderous witches and shadowy Medusae, or snake ladies. This is... Daughters of Khaine are just a really interesting... Like, when you look at some of these power distributions, Daughters of Khaine really are an interesting one to look at. So... Their whole thing is their power through worship, right? Their worship through murder, just like their prayer. They want to go out and kill things, right? Which is kind of what our game is about. It's killing things efficiently. And as you play them, everything gets stronger, right? The blood rights start affecting everything. Their bonus is only effective on their turn, but then as the blood rights get stronger, it can really turn the tides, ironically. And I think they are the strongest melee damage in the game as far as consistency. We do have them as a 5, starting off off the bat. That's a 5 melee army, right? You've got witch elves; they can do crazy amounts of damage, and it doesn't require too much setup, in my opinion. I think that their setup for that is fairly easy to do, and on top of that, they have big support from being able to fight on death. You've got Crystalline Touch, which is a great ability in melee with their snakes. So snakes and witch elves are both a great playstyle. Morathi herself can even make them fight again in the hero phase if that's what you're going for. And speaking of hero phase fighting, they're ranged, right? There's the one unit that's just defining everything. The bow snakes are a 4, right? You've got double tapping every turn, which is something not even we could do back when we could double tap with a full unit. They can double tap with a reinforced unit every single turn, and it's really decent damage. So they can do that along with being able to keep those snakes somewhat alive. So they're able to apply that pressure. They aren't able to really teleport / keep them safe in the way that we can, which I think is what keeps them from being a 5. Right, they've got some shenanigan with the double tap, but it's not quite to our level to where we can really leverage our ranged versus them. Even when you shoot them, right, they can't double tap and rally in the same turn, even though they have a really good rally. So there's limitations to what they can do in range, and it's loosely limitations, right, in the context that we're up here in the sky as far as ranged power projection goes. As far as magic, they're definitely they like their spells, right? You want to get Mind Razor off. That is super important. You can do so much damage with that. But they're not necessarily the best casters, right? Your best cast is going to come from Morathi. She's a +1. I think she's a 2 cast. So you've got some decent wizards as far as Morathi goes, and you want to have your spells go off.
Hold on,
not a magic dog.
I thought she lost the +1 to cast.
No, wait,
Morathi. She had a +2 to cast, I think.
No, she had a +1, and she lost it.
Yeah, that's gone. That was second edition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Never mind. Yeah. So, like I said, not the best casting, but they want their spells to go off, right? Those are impactful spells. Mind Razor by itself is.
I mean, naturally, I would disagree on that. I think the magic being 2 here is fine. Their only impactful spell is Mind Razor. Yeah. They don't really care about anything else. The rest of the time, they're just doing Mystic Shield. Yeah. Mind Razor is basically their version of Celestial Blades.
Pretty much, yeah.
For us. But Mind Razor is just way more impactful. It's such a hard cast, and it gets shut down so easily by any Magic Dom army, that it's just not worth it a lot of times for them.
Okay.
However, with Morathi casting 3 spells a turn, her War Scroll spells are more impactful because she just casts does a bunch of mortal wounds at range.
And that's why they're a 2, right? They use magic. The magic is good, but it's not totally reliable.
Yeah, you can build one without Mind Razor and be totally fine against a lot of things.
There is also the Withering. I think Benjamin in chat. Yep, Benjamin in chat just pointed out the Withering is really good because it works on shooting as well, I believe, if I remember our review correctly. There are 2 in Magic, but their prayers really define them. Like Fyreslayers, they have tons of prayers. They're really good. They want to use them. If Morathi wasn't defining every single list in competitive play right now, if you're looking at Daughters of Khaine from if everything's viable in terms of identity, you would bring multiple priests with this army, and they're fantastic prayers.
Like a double
you would see at least 2 to 3 priests, maybe even a prayer enhancement to give everyone a similar prayer or something.
For
it's
sure.
really, really good.
Yeah.
As far as speed goes, they're not necessarily the fastest army in the game, but they do have some bonuses, and those bonuses can stack together really well. You've got the ability to run in charge with most of the army and get bonuses for both, so they're definitely a 3 in speed. They're not necessarily their augments. They're really good speed augments, but their base speed isn't great. So it keeps it back at a 3. And then going back to mobility, very similar thing. Them being able to, I think they can retreat and charge, right? With
No, they can run and charge. They can't retreat. They can retreat and charge with Keltnar, but that's not what.
They got some interesting tricks, right? We didn't talk about Sisters of Slaughter in the melee, but if you play Kraith, they can double fight and just win the game with their insanely high damage. And Sisters of Slaughter can always just retreat and then pile in 6 inches in the combat phase.
There we go.
They have really nice combat tricks. They do have reserve units with the Khaineri. They do have a really crappy teleport spell. They can Calibron teleport. So it's hard to call them even a 2 seems not enough. Maybe a 2.5. They're not quite a 3 though. They're not at that
Yeah,
level.
it's
Like,
not
I mean,
quite
they're not
core.
zooming around the battlefield. Their mobility is based around micromanaging combat tricks for the most part.
Yeah, it's not core to their identity for sure. Because
Yeah.
we consider 3 to be starting to be core to the identity for sure.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
the thing is, you don't need the combat tricks with this army because like if you connect with snakes or with buffed up witches, you just obliterate everything. Like you don't need to have mobility when you just kill everything. Yeah. And in
But with
defense,
great,
yeah. No, go ahead, Dan. You got it. You got it, man.
with great offense comes low defense. Yeah, elves just blow up. It used to be they could get really tanky by stacking buffs to go up the blood right table and get that 5 of ward, for example, early. And now they can't. And they had to reroll saves, I think. Something.
No, they had immune to battle shock with Hag
Immune to
Brew,
battle shock,
5 of ward from their general turn 1,
Yeah.
like an aura of 12-inch aura. It was really obnoxious, but now they've lost
they used
all
to
of
have
that.
so much defense, but thankfully they're now easy to blow up. You know, if you don't blow them up, yeah, that could be a big mistake, but they're very easy to blow up. They're on 1 in defense for sure. They have some defense tricks on their turn because they can, you know, go up the blood right table and it helps them out. But otherwise, they are a very low defense army the way it should be.
Yeah,
As far as
other than
sustain
Marathi, I mean, other than Marathi, nothing really is too durable.
goes.
Now they have access to a 4-up rally thanks to one of their command traits,
Yep.
but that really helps them out in the other
Sustain
department.
category.
Sustain and wounds. Yep.
That's exactly why there are 2. They don't have any revives, but they do have the ability to rally well with Zealous Order.
Now that unlike the Fyreslayer rally, Daughters of Khaine are pretty much their rally is a little bit worse because while Fyreslayers are going to rally back really durable dudes, this army's not really rallying back anything durable. Like they're rallying back bow snakes more often than not because if you're in melee, you can't rally, right? And so you're really just going to use this against shooting. But this army does so much damage in melee, they're just going to obliterate stuff before it hits them. So you're just rallying back bow snakes. That's 9 times out of 10 I've seen people rally in this army. It's on bow snakes.
Yeah, that was the other thing, Ben. Thank you. Yeah, that 5 of ward used to be able to be rerolled. That 5 of ward against regular damage. That was pretty good.
But definitely, they still have a 6-up rerollable ward, which is almost as good as a 5+ ward. So their wound characteristic is really high. It takes a lot of damage to kill a full Daughters of Khaine army. If you're just using long strikes and grand hammers, it might take you a little while. But if you start swapping into higher volume attackers like crossbow adjudicators, vanquishers, these things can really chew through a lot of them really quickly. It's tough to kill 30 wounds of bow snakes that have a 6+ rerollable ward, and then save stacking, mystic shield, and all that stuff. So it takes a lot of damage, and that works well with their sustain. So these two things, but it's still it's nothing compared to what other armies do, right? Like
It's
this
not
is
the same.
no,
Yeah.
still feels fragile. It still feels like, oh, people are rolling dice. I'm going to lose that a lot of models every time.
Yeah. It's not Sentinels with crushing Aether Quartz, Mystic Shield, being,
Right.
Yeah. But in terms of models, they are like maybe a little more than like Idoneth. We were talking Idoneth was about a 3. They're very like medium army where they bring some Hoardier, I guess not Hoardier, but like some 10 model base units. Whereas Daughters of Khaine, of course, also uses 10 model base units, but does rely on like Marathi, for example. So she kind of brings the model count back down, along with Snakes being a little less model count as well. That kind of rounds it out.
Yeah, they're somewhere between a 3 and a 4. 3.5 is where we landed on that.
They're very spread out.
Yeah,
for sure.
So,
on their chart.
This is a hard one to judge in terms of identity because the faction's being warped around Marathi entirely. So it's like, do you rate them as fast because the Shadow Queen is fast? Do you rate them as durable because it takes 4 turns to kill Marathi? Do you rate them as a really good shooting army because double tapping bow snakes are so good? It's tough to nail down the identity. We kind of looked at the whole book when we did this and just thought what they were going for. I don't think the current state of Daughters of Khaine in competitive play is representative of the faction's identity. I don't think it was fully intentional that everybody just plays Marathi and 15 bow snakes.
So we kind of split the difference.
Yeah.
Right? If it was a lot of witches and such like we would kind of expected it to be, their models would easily be a 4, easily.
Yeah.
More.
Yeah. Well, they get 10 witches for like 110 points. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. Next up, Sylvaneth. They do decent melee damage. Not as much as Stormcast, right? Like you compare something like Kurnoths with Great Scythes versus Grand Hammers, and it's like, point for point, Grand Hammers are just doing more damage. So you have to reinforce the Kurnoths, and at that point you have a really elite, hard-hitting unit, but it's only hitting one thing at a time, and then it's retreating out of the way. So their melee is good, but it's not quite as good as Stormcast. Just in terms of raw damage output, I think.
Yeah. they're doing a lot of accurate damage, but it's very pinpoint. It's all about putting it exactly where you need it to be. This army punishes you really bad for not leveraging your damage where you need to.
Yeah, so ease of application and broad damage is just a little bit worse than Stormcast. Well, application is okay because you got the trees, you teleport, you have the charging stuff, but yeah, they don't have any like fancy tricks for combat. Like the Tree Lord can make you fight last, but how many people use a Tree Lord in a regular list? It's usually just summoned in with a Larial. There's stuff there. Like they're not a bad melee army. They do rely on their melee because their shooting is inefficient. Sylvaneth are not. I don't want to say capable of winning through pure shooting, but it's really, really hard to do it because if you just bring an all-shooting list, you'll notice you're not going to do that much damage. Their shooting options are expensive or have limitations. Like Karnos with bows are just not point-for-point very good shooting damage output. They do have super long range, so they're gonna and they're durable, so they're gonna survive and they're gonna shoot every turn. But then you compare that to like, well, how much damage can crossbow adjudicators do in comparison, right? Like, you just blow stuff off the table with that unit. Kurnoths are pinging things down, trying to snipe support heroes, adding damage, and then you finish it off with melee. You need to bring a lot of them to have a serious impact, and that just leaves you with not a lot of points to do anything else. Whereas the Glade Archers, what are they called? The Gossamed Archers.
Gossamer?
That's it. Gossamids,
Yeah, they are high impact, but then they're super fragile. They have a 12-inch shooting range, so even though they have like a high threat range, they get in there, they roll a bunch of mortal wounds, they might kill something. They have a lot of problems. They can't reach stuff like a Kurnoth with a bow could because there's limits on where you can finish a normal move relative to enemies, and then only 12-inch shooting range really limits them. You have to bring a lot of them because their main thing is that they just do mortal wounds on 6s, and you need a lot of dice to make that valuable, and I think it's like 2 shots per model, so you're going to bring like 10, 15, 20 of them to make a real difference, and that just starts to add up in points. This is a very elite army.
It's a shotgun, but it's a really fragile shotgun.
Yeah, it's nice. It's kind of like Hurricane Wind Chargers. They're very similar in terms of use. But Sylvaneth are good at magic. They're one of the better magic armies. They're not up there with the top contenders like Lumineth or Tzeentch, but they're up there. They have good spells. They want to cast them. They have reliable, like guaranteed once per game you can cast some spells. They have a whole playstyle revolving around doing damage with a spellcaster general. So they are one of the better magic armies in the game, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. They rely on their Spitestorm Hive going off to be able to do the shenanigans that they do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not getting their bonuses to charge unless they can bring a battle mage for redundancy. But even then, like they're still they want that magic to go off. They have Vespero Gem, which is one of the only things that of course can be cast and not unbound to get that Spitestorm Hive off. So they're really relying on it. They want it to happen, and they have decent wizards.
Yep. No prayers, obviously, so that's a 0. So speed and mobility is an interesting discussion with Sylvaneth because they have some faster units. They have the Glade Riders, which have a pregame move, I believe, and then they also are just super fast, like 16 or 14-inch flying move. Yeah, it is sub-faction.
The 16-inch move is fast.
But like everything else is so slow. It teleports. They're super mobile. But, as a faction, it's like your Kurnoths, unless they're teleporting, are not really going anywhere useful.
No. No, they're not.
So it's hard to rank them. Maybe a 2.5 just to represent just how much faster their fast units are than Stormcast.
Bugs are very fast.
Yeah, maybe that would have been more appropriate. But yeah, they're not a very fast army, but super mobile. And we argued a lot about whether they should be a 5 in mobility or a 4. We landed at 4.5 because there's some limitations to it, right? Like you can't just put woods anywhere you want. There's specific ranges where you can put them, and since you can only teleport to the woods. But then you've got stuff like Tree Revenants, which are super teleporty. They just teleport every turn with no restrictions.
Tree Lords can teleport innately as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good teleporting here. I think if you want to call them a 5, man, yeah, I get it. Like they're so good at it, and it's so core to their identity as well.
I personally think they're a 5, but we landed at 4.5 just to differentiate from. Admittedly, they don't have a 3.0 book yet, but KO would be technically the most mobile, just because they can move their whole army at once.
Yeah, teleport the whole army with no restrictions on terrain or anything. Just like boop, it was over here, now it's over here. That's got to be the gold standard, I think.
I do find it very easy, especially a lot of them take, I think it's the Reaping, where they allow an extra 3 inches of teleporting around. They're able to cover quite a lot of board space with the few trees they get out. Obviously, if you stop the cast for the trees, it's very limiting.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
you can really counter deploy and stop them. But they're really mobile. That's definitely the case.
Yeah, there's compared to Caradron, really is no counterplay, right? It's like just you have to put bodies there. That's the only thing you can do to stop it. There's nothing else you can do. But anyway, yeah, Sylvaneth super mobile, and also they can avoid damage really well. Kurnoths are durable. You know, they're also highly sustainable. They heal, they revive models. They're a high sustain, high defense army that is going to like strike and fade over and over and over until you just don't have enough stuff left on the board to contest objectives. And that they're great at that. That is a fantastic, unique playstyle for this army. And I think that's what they've been trying to do since first edition, and they finally nailed it with the third edition book.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
It's funny because you want to take your whole army and just go at them to stop them. But at the same time, like they're just going to be teleporting out of the way. They're durable, so like they can take the hit and then get out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very interesting army to play against for sure.
Yeah. So they have good saves. They can save stack pretty well on their main hammer units. They have disposable cheap chaff. They have trees to block line of sight against most things. They can just avoid damage really well. So they get a high score in that. And sustain, like I said, they revive models like is it the Spite Revenants that revive the dudes, or is it the other ones? Seekers?
Not Spite Riders, Seekers. Thank
Seekers.
you, Revenant Seekers.
Yeah, reviving a Kurnoth is nuts. Using a spell to revive another one is nuts. Like, these are 5 wounds worth of models that you're reviving every time, right? This is
3-up.
Yeah, it's
In a wild woods.
on top of a lot of healing. Like, if they don't get destroyed, they just bring lots of dudes back. They're also summoning more Dryads with a Branch Witch, potentially. Alariel is adding more stuff to the game. They're a high sustain army, and it feels good. In terms of wound count, it feels like you have to do less damage to them than Stormcast typically. But they can, if you don't do it all, they're going to heal back a lot. So we gave them a 2.5 on wounds, and they feel about as elite as Stormcast does, so a 2 there as well. Yep. And then in terms of flavor, Sylvaneth, if you've never played the faction, you look at the models and you think, oh, there's a cool like trees and fairies and all that stuff, and it's like, yeah, that's pretty much the faction. The forest and the fairies fight together. You can just add more woods throughout the game as you go along. You're just constantly adding more terrain. You're slow, but you can teleport. You can cast through your woods. Like, if you want to just be a gardener and just pretend you're fighting against bugs that are invading your garden, Sylvaneth are the perfect army for that. They feel really good.
Mm-hmm.
And next up, the Lumineth. So we've talked a lot about this recently because we just put out a review of their book. So this is all pretty fresh still. Their melee damage is below average, I'd say. They're not super punchy in terms of melee damage. I think the best fighters they have are like a Volinor and like a double reinforced block of Wardens or a double reinforced block of Stoneguard. Something like that is like their best melee option. And it's like, it's just okay, right? Like they have this ability to fight with 2 units at once. But it doesn't really get utilized that much because I don't know how many units want to be fighting at the same time with this army, because they're just so slow and so good at shooting and so good at magic. And you kind of lean into those things instead. And their range is spectacular. Sentinels are really, really good. Not like crazy high volume of damage, but they're really accurate because every shot has a chance of doing a mortal wound on a 5+. You have spectacular magic in this army, arguably the best magic in the game. This is definitely like the best.
Oh, they definitely have the best spell in the game.
Yeah,
damn sure.
This is probably like the best defensive magic in the game. I would say Tzeentch has the best offensive magic. This army has the best defensive magic.
Yeah.
And they are some of the best casters at it as well, because they can just take a hero that once per game autocasts whatever spell they want on a 9. So you can autocast endless spells. You can autocast their amazing spells. All of their like basic infantry are also wizards. So like, really, really awesome. They have exceptional anti-magic too, right? Like Teclis just has unlimited unbinds and automatically unbinds 1 spell per turn. They get all kinds of bonuses to casting and unbinding. Like, this is the premier magic army if you want to play defensive magic. This is the way to do it. They don't have any prayers, so don't worry about that nonsense. They are slow. Like I mentioned, they are a slow army because they rely on 6-inch move infantry, and you can double that with Speed of Hish, but overall, only 1 unit is getting Speed of Hish, and it may not be the 1 unit that you want to get at that turn. It's also unreliable to cast that spell. People may focus on binding it to take advantage of the fact that you're just slow without it. There's no run and charge. There's no bonuses to charging in this army. So even though you do have a teleport, which plays into your mobility. This army can't just teleport around and then charge stuff in reliably. There are fast units, right? Like the Wind Chargers and Spirit of the Wind are super fast. But overall, the army doesn't play fast. They use that speed as like, I've shot you to bits. You've tried to attack my castle formation and I've blown you up. Now I'm going to use that speed to compensate for my lack of speed and capture stuff around the board, right? It's like, you don't go Alpha Strike with this army. Whereas, even though you could get a 48-inch flying move, it's not a fast army. I don't think this army plays fast. I mean, it can, but it's not very good at doing that. So, mobility-wise, they have a teleport. Dan, what else did we say for mobility for this army? I think teleport was about it, right?
Teleport and
Hurricane leaving combat, I guess, is a mobility trick.
That's about the best mobility.
The kangaroos can pile in out of combat.
There's flying units. That's about it for mobility. Yeah. Defense. This is a really like, oh man, when all the spells are up, when everything is in line, when you've played this correctly and you've gotten all your dice rolls, I think this might be the hardest army to kill, because you can have stuff like 30 wardens that are ethereal, so they ignore all rend on a 4+, -1 to hit from Shining Company, giving -1 to wound from an artifact. Total Eclipse, so you're 5 up board, Total Eclipse to deny your opponent command abilities. Like, this is a really tough army to kill. They avoid damage really well. They can.
Everything goes right, though.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that there's disruption. So unlike Stormcast, which like Lord Castellan can't be unbound, Gardas just exists until he doesn't, right? Well, that's a ward, so that's wounds, but you know what I mean. Like, the ability to avoid damage in this army is really, really, really high if you have a hero phase and if you have your spells go off, because it's all reliant on spells. When that goes off, you're like a 5 in defense, and when it doesn't, you're like a 2. You're like really bad.
And that's the thing. You also have very low base saves, so even though you have all this save stacking, you can only ever get so good.
Yeah,
which is the other part of the issue.
And the defensive buffs aren't enough to hand them out to individual units. You have to concentrate that effort. Being ethereal is cool. It's not as cool as you think when you don't have a ward save.
Yeah, it can be rough. Being ethereal, especially on like a 4-up, is not necessarily the greatest. Even Nighthaunt really likes to have their 5-up board on top of that. So it's their defense is 4.5 literally only because it's a 5 best case, and then like most of the time it probably sits at around like a 3 or a 4. So 4.5 is probably about right for army identity.
Yeah, you're trying to get there, right? You're trying to skew as much as possible and get to that point. In terms of sustain, they have a healing spell on big targets. They don't have like bonuses to rally. They're not summoning stuff, so like they're not a high sustain army. Every hit they take is really impactful and meaningful. But that plays into their high defense, right? So like you want to do as much damage as quickly as possible because they can't sustain through it. But then they have all this crazy high defense to kind of, you force yourself on into their face, and then they just riposte. That's what this army does. They castle and riposte, and they do it very well.
The best point of their sustain is the fact that they have 1/1 models, so their rally is more effective, and that's about it.
Yeah, like Life Swarm, I guess, reviving D3 per turn.
It's very minimal.
They do have a high wounds characteristic relative to Stormcast because they just have so many bodies, and they have a 5-up board usually, right? Like when you play against Lumineth, you're assuming they're going to have that 5-up board either from Techless or from a regular mage. So they're a higher wound army for sure. And in terms of model count, their basic infantry is 10 models. They want to bring lots of them. You're going to end up with like 60 plus models in this army regularly without even trying. High model count. They can contest objectives pretty well. They can hold terrain. So in terms of flavor, we should start these with the flavor first, I feel like, because if this is for new people, we start going into gameplay without talking about what this is. So in terms of flavor, like you've got regiments of elves supported by geomantic elites, so like River Temple, Water Temple, Wind Temple, things like that. They love volleys of magic arrows and ballista shots just pour into the enemy. Everything in this army was created by Techless. He's the god of magic, and because of that, they're really good at magic. Even the standard infantry are wizards. Like if you just want your basic spearmen and archers to be wizards, they're awesome, and they're good at it. They're really good spellcasters. They have amazing spells. One of the most frustrating armies to play against, honestly, because they're so good at spellcasting and their spells are so strong. They can use their magic to support themselves or disable you. It's one of the few armies that really has like a true control playstyle where they are stopping you from doing things, reducing your run rolls, reducing your movement, making you roll under your bravery in order to do anything. It's a frustrating experience. So if you are, like my brother and just want the most frustrating army to play against, then Lumineth are for you.
But to be fair, the new 3rd edition book is less oppressive than it used to be.
Oh yeah, it's way better.
Because their spells,
I feel like
spells, it's
at large. I feel
be
like
bad. It can be bad, but a lot of these oppressive effects are now once per game or very difficult to get off the spells. All of the casting values on these powerful spells went up. So, and there isn't a lot of bonuses to spells more than once per game. Because like every unit can get a +1. But once that happens, they're done. That's it. They don't get that bonus anymore.
Well, you can reroll with the Shrine. Zytrek, another
you
+1.
can reroll with the Shrine. You can spend an Aether Quartz to reroll and get a +1. Zytrek gives you +1, which is the most common.
Techless is another +1.
Yeah. Like it's the thing is their magic has gotten more reliable. It's less oppressive, but they also like did not compensate them in terms of damage. Like Lumineth was essentially the most frustrating blue deck to play, and they took away a lot of that without giving them anything back. So this army, that's why we're like, this army will like feel that against some armies because there isn't a lot to compensate in terms of like wounds and defense when a Lumineth list starts losing. Yeah. But they still can be frustrating. They still have a lot of their blue deck tools, just not as oppressive as second ed.
It's like this list does not want to run into damage tracks. Like it doesn't want to run into Nurgle too much.
Or Gargants.
Yeah. Or Gargants.
Yeah.
Not without Alinor. Like Alinor is just going to be a staple in a lot of lists.
But it doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about our first destruction army, the Ironjawz. So they have exceptional melee. Some of the best melee in the game, between the charged mortal wounds,
Flavor.
Right, flavor, sorry. Thank you.
But
right,
also, one more thing.
Yep.
You definitely made this look like a gore hacka. I'm sorry, but I'm still seeing the class. It's a gore hacka.
It's coincidence. All right, so flavor-wise, Ironjawz are the biggest and toughest orcs. Their god, Gorka Morka, he calls for violence, and these guys answer it. They are, arguably the fastest army in the game. They love to get stuck into combat. They just love fighting, and they the longer you live, the better you fight. That's their theory. So hence they cover themselves in heavy armor, whereas other orcs are just like, I don't care. I'm just going to get there as fast as possible and just fight as much as possible. These guys are like, I got this. Wear heavy armor, fight longer. Big brain. That's the extent of orc brains. So and then it works. That description fits them perfectly. The faction is really defined by their cavalry, which is only battle line in one of their subfactions, but it's so prominent and so useful that even if you don't play that subfaction, you're going to bring a bunch of pigs anyway. We call them pigs. They're Gorgruntas. It's a featured unit here on the screen. Their melee is exceptional. They're Rend 2 across the board for a lot of attacks. They do a bunch of charged mortal wounds. They have a high volume of attacks as well because they just have so many models on the table. They do their ability to do charged mortal wounds, and then if that kills a unit, they can pile into another unit and do it again. It's a huge threat. In fact, it's so threatening that we did a video on how to counter Ironjawz, because it's kind of like the gold standard by which you compare all other melee armies to. So we always reference back to that one anytime we talk about a melee army like Nighthaunt. Their melee is great. They have super high rend. They can push their rend even further once per game with their big wog. Yep. And that totally makes up for the fact that they have almost no range power. The only thing these guys are going to do to get past screens is hopefully charge mortal wounds into them and then pile in past them. And we'll talk about their mobility, like they don't fly either, but we'll get there. In terms of magic, they have a wizard, and it has spells, one of which can teleport you, which is nice. Sometimes you can cast a purple sun if you get lucky. Yeah, they're not a wizard faction. They're not really focused on magic. They don't really have anti-magic either. They just take whatever spells your opponent throws at them. Ironjawz have one plan, and that plan is go fast, hit them hard, cripple them to the point where they can't recover, and hopefully win on objectives before they kill you, because they will kill you. You're not going to survive with Ironjawz. They're not such a durable army that you can avoid all the damage forever. You will die, but hopefully you get enough ahead on tactics and battle strategies and things like that that you just win the game. No prayers, super fast. And what makes them fast is that they have this command ability. Gosh, what is it called? I can't remember.
Mighty Destroyers.
Oh, Mighty Destroyers.
Thank you, Mighty Destroyers. And that ability is a command ability that you put on up to 3 units if you have a Maw Crusher boss or just Mega Boss on foot. And those units can either move or charge or pile in. Now, that you don't get a choice in that, and that's how you kind of play around this army. If you're more than 12 inches away, you get to normal move. If you're within 12 inches, you have to charge. So, when you combine their fancy teleport spell with this ability, if you teleport 10 inches away, you have to declare a charge. But let's say you teleport 12.1 inches away, well, now you could just make a normal move of 9 or 10 inches or whatever, and then you have a much easier charge later in the turn. So, yeah, super fast army. When you have your basic battle line moving 18 inches across the board and then charging with... Did they still get a +1 charge, or is that a second edition thing? Tough keeping it all straight.
They get a +1 on Big Wah when they declare the wall.
Okay. That's the turn they're going to try to do their crippling damage, where they have the bonus rend, they have the bonus to charge. They're going to deal a whole bunch of charge mortal wounds, and hopefully they're going to cripple you. So they're very fast. You pretty much can't avoid getting charged by them. Like, we talked about this in our How to Counter Ironjawz. If they want to charge you, they're going to charge you. They're going to deploy out of whatever threat range you have. If you're another melee army, they're just going to sit outside your threat range and then charge you once you move up, or just charge you, period, right? Like, they're going to go first and charge you. Mobility wise, they're not looking too good. I think the only thing really keeping them up in terms of mobility is that they have a teleport spell, and they have... It
synergizes really well.
Yeah, it does synergize very well. And they have a few combat tricks, right? Like, their subfaction ability is at the end of the combat phase. They get to do some fancy movement. There's a higher skill cap on this army than we're giving off here. It's not like, Seraphon or Tzeentch Gigabrain levels of play, but there is some fancy stuff you can do. It's not just literally move forward and hit stuff. There's more to it than that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You would think this is a lower skill cap army, and while it's not necessarily a high skill cap army, there's more to it than you think, and really good players make this army do things you wouldn't expect.
Really low skill floor, right? So in order to have like the minimum effectiveness, if you just move forward and hit stuff, you're going to win a lot of games against inexperienced players. So that's fine, and that's totally fine for armies like this to exist. Defense-wise, they kind of just take damage. I think the only thing propping them up is that they have an army-wide 4+ save, right? Like, nothing's worse than a 4+ save. And because of your ability to issue commands to 3 units at a time, you could issue all-out defense to 3 different units. So I think that props them up a little bit to make them a bit more defensive than some other armies we've seen. But it's nothing like Lumineth or Stormcast, where we can just avoid damage. If they want to bring cheap screens, they have to bring like Brutes or Ardboys, which are, well, they're not that cheap. Pretty much you're screening with pigs with this army, which is not ideal. In terms of sustain, they only get a point here because I think Ardboys get a bonus to rally. I think it's Ardboys. It's not Brutes, right? It's Ardboys.
Yeah, Ardboys.
Yeah, so that kind of gives them a point in case you want to lead into that. In terms of wounds and models, like, an Ironjawz army has about as many wounds as a Stormcast army without Gardas. So that's like a 2, right? Nothing spectacular. About the same model count too, right? They might bring a couple less models, but it's about the same. It's not like a 3. It's not like Idoneth or something like that. So elite, hard-hitting, fast, easy to play, has some higher advanced techniques that you can do as well. So I highly recommend this army to new players. If you're just learning Age of Sigmar for the first time, this is a good one to learn with. And then there's like the opposite of that, which is the Kruleboyz, ironically being put in the starter box. Even though they are not a starter army, man, they are hard to play. Dan or Maggotkin, you guys want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So Kruleboyz, their main faction identity revolves around poison and poison attacks, meaning the ability to do mortal wounds on 6s and 5s. They're built around a lot of dirty tricks, like either dragging your units away or their units forward or hiding their units. Nothing in their army is like really tough or like hits particularly hard, other than maybe like a couple of monsters or like the troll, but they essentially make up for that with poison and like hitting you unexpectedly. Recently they got the buff where their shamans can cast spells in addition to their poison, and their spells are actually really, like the faction identity, really tricky. They can do a lot of good stuff, and I'm actually glad for that change. And the fact that their main identity comes from mortal wounds is pretty good because it means that all our save stacking doesn't mean anything if you don't have Gardas. They can just cut through elite armies like butter. They have low volume, high accuracy, which is pretty right. Essentially, the army functions like Lumineth in that sense. It has no reserves, but it has some teleporting either through the use of like a command trait or it has some mobility options too. Like I think there's a spell, Sneaky Miasma or something, that lets a monster move twice.
Yeah.
And they have good tricks against shooting. They can't be in Ungrinning Blades. They can't be seen by units more than 12 inches away, which is a really, really good threat against range projection because that works. Unlike Idoneth, it actually works against magic and shooting. So they're just not visible. Period. So yeah, I would say in melee, they're about a 2.5 to 3. If they aren't rolling those 5s and 6s against you, they're not doing any damage. Gut don't really do any damage. I guess the Bolt Boys are -2 rend 2 damage, but on 4s and 3s, I think that's what their stats are. If they're not mortal wounding you, they're not going to do significant damage to you. Some of their trolls might, but they have such low attacks. Most of them, again, are just relying on poison. They're a slow army, definitely. Most of their things move 5 or 6 inches. Even their monsters, I think, move only like 8 inches. So they do need to position really carefully, be really careful about the double turn. Their magic is good, but all the spells are either low range and high cast values, and they don't have any rerolls or pluses to cast built in, which is a huge problem for them. But if the spells do go off, they're actually really dangerous, like removing ward saves, minusing melee attacks from your melee attack profile. It's all really good. They have no prayers to speak of, so it doesn't matter. Mobility-wise, other than tricks, they don't really have much going for them. Their defenses are really bad. I think the army never gets better than a 4-up save. Even their base infantry, like Bolt Boys and Gut Rippers, are all on 5-ups. Even their main hard-hitting monsters are only on 4-ups. So if you focus them with any amount of good melee attention, this army will melt. And yeah, it currently does melt. Again, they're orcs, so bravery isn't really something they can ever really rely on. And wound-wise, yeah, they have no summoning, so they don't really have a lot of sustainability on the battlefield. Wounds, I would say they're about the same as like an orc or a Stormcast army, so like about a 2.53. So yeah, and model count-wise, they're not much better either. This is a very scalpel, high skill ceiling army. Only like really skilled players can make good use of this. Because experienced players just know how to avoid them and, take them out. So they're heavily punished for their mistakes. Yeah.
Even when you do play it well, a lot of their stuff is like random, right? Like a lot of their tricks are like activating on a 4+ once per game or something.
Yeah.
It really feels like behind the scenes they're making a new version of this army because they, like with the errata we've been seeing, Grin and Blaze just got a completely new ability. Right, like basically it works every turn. Shamans have been eroded significantly, so that it feels like this army was designed a long time ago, like somewhere in the beginning of 3rd edition they were working on this army, and they're kind of updating it and bringing it up to date. So I would love a 3.5 book, maybe not for all of the orcs, but just for this army.
I think the thing is they took away a lot away from the army because how the army works in Mortal Wounds. Like when this army like rolls hot, like you feel like there's nothing you can do against in combat, and that's true. Like if I charge 10 protectors into Gut Rippers and they start rolling 5s and 6s like mad, you're gonna feel like you're doing nothing against them. Whereas if they don't roll those 5s and 6s and they're just doing honest damage, then you're just like, okay, what's the point? What's the point of this army exactly?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like they got the Lumineth, like how like Lumineth do mortal wounds, and so they're really high costed. They don't have a lot of like other stuff other than their magic going on. They were just really afraid of what this army would do if they gave it all the good things and the mortal wounds. And I think it maybe shouldn't have had as much of a focus on mortal wounds. I think the focus of this army should have been the tricks. The mortal wounds could have just been kept on 6s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
mechanically intensive would have been okay.
Yeah, like give them tricks. Like give them like, oh, this unit just appears here. This unit has this trick. It does this. Like like. You roll 5 dice, each of them is a random trick, and you apply one of those tricks to each of your units. Make this army tricky. Don't make this Lumineth, but worse.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it feels like. It's just Lumineth mortal wounds, but without any of the blue deck stuff.
It's orcs pretending to be Lumineth.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. Instead of the tricky orcs, they're just like, they're just or Lumineth orcs. Yeah.
I think they've got a good foundation. A good cleanup with a 3.5 Battletome would really set them up right. Or like a White Dwarf update or something. Got Rip is at 180 per 10 at the start. Like, what
Oh, they're
were they
160
thinking?
now, I think.
Yeah.
160 now, but that's still.
Still
But I
too
think
much.
like no, realistically, until they get a new book, it'll be a race to the bottom. What they'll do is like they'll keep reducing the points, and at some point it'll hit critical mass, so it'll be like Beasts of Chaos, where it's just so good because you can't kill enough of them in time.
I highly can't. I can't recommend this army for new players. They're really techy. They're really punishing on mistakes. You have to master the basics of the game and then master the techniques this army requires, and you are punished every mistake you make. Like it can't. Like do not play this army if you're a new player. It's not easy.
Yeah.
Play
I'm also
Ironjawz.
sad about that. I'm also sad about that buff that they're gonna get over like successive months, because I hate that buff where it's just like, oh, we reduced your points to like so low that there's not many armies in the game that can just kill you in time.
Mhm.
You know, that brute force patch is something I absolutely hate. So I hope that doesn't happen with this army. I hope they actually like update it.
I hope so too, because they got great flavor, right? Like trappers and slavers are just gonna like pop out of the swamp and just pull you into it. Their shamans are like poisoning weapons, and they're like sitting there just waiting. It's almost like some kind of guerrilla warfare, right? Where they've set up all these encampments and just waiting for you to walk into it all. And then like you've got their shamans, which are like transforming the battlefield into a swamp, and you've got like vultures and stuff. They have a really unique aesthetic that I never thought I would want to see in this game, but now that it's here, like I want more of it. I want this to be a powerful, strong army.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Cool.
All right, next up, the Bonesplitterz, finishing off our trifecta of orc armies. The Bonesplitterz are quite different from the other ones. They have limited ranged, right? Like with Ironjawz have no ranged. Bolt Boys. Kruleboyz have really good ranged, and Bonesplitterz are kind of just in the middle of both of these armies in terms of melee and damage and range damage output. But what they lack in quality of attacks, they just have tons of attacks. Like they roll more dice, I think, than any other army in the game. They have tons and tons of models, tons of units, and they just roll loads of dice. So flavor-wise, it's an overwhelming horde of savage orcs. These are the orcs who just hear the wog and they run for it. They don't bother picking up armor. They just go for it. Half of their army gets to move 5 inches after deployment, which makes them really, really fast because like everything just advances, especially if you use their cavalry. You move 5 inches after the game starts, and then you move cavalry forward at like cavalry distance, which is huge. They have poor accuracy, but tons and tons of damage. So like if you're playing in something like 60 zombie hordes in Soulblight, you just need to do loads and loads of max damage, your accuracy isn't as important, then these guys are great at that because they have a potential really high max damage. Everything has exploding hit 6 in melee. That means that if you roll a hit roll of 6, you just hit twice instead of once, so that furthers their high volume attacks into even more attacks. But yeah, in terms of melee, they're okay. They're not like the scariest melee army. Their goal is to just win through overwhelming redundancy, right? Like I think that's how we put it, Dan. They're redundant. You're gonna kill like 3 or 4 of their units, but that's okay because they got like 12 more. They're a very high unit count army. They bring a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. This is the definition of critical mass. This army is critical mass.
Yeah. Their magic.
I'll be right back, guys.
Sure.
Sorry.
Their magic is good and it's impactful, but they're not like the best wizards in the game, right? Like they can be shut down pretty easily by the better magic armies, but they have really good spells. Stuff like giving your mounts Rend 2 or like just doing a bunch of mortal wounds through spells. Like they have good stuff, and I think it's central to their identity. They're just not as good at it, and it's not as central to their identity as like Kruleboyz. Like Kruleboyz really want their magic to go off. Bonesplitterz do as well, but not to the same extent. No prayers, again, not an army with prayers. They are fast though. Like I said, half your army can move 5 inches before the game starts, and then you can have a whole bunch of boar boys just running up the board and engaging turn 1. So pretty speedy army. Once you're in the mid game and you don't have that pre-game 5-inch move, they probably go down to like a 3. But because that pre-game move exists, they're a pretty fast army. Mobility wise, they're why did we give them a 2?
The pre-game move, but
that sounds like speed
is
though.
A little more. That one was more speed. I don't know why we gave them a 2 there.
Maybe they should be a 1 in mobility because I can't think of anything. They don't fly. They don't have reserves. They don't teleport.
Yeah.
Maybe they should be 1.
I think
They teleport.
Do they?
Oh, I guess that's the one thing. Green hand. They still have. Yeah, they have great green hand.
Okay, great. That's enough to give them a point up usually for a teleport. In terms of defense, like they take damage. They have terrible saves. Everything has a ward, which plays into their high wound count, but they just take damage. I think the reason we bumped them up to a 2 in defense is twofold. One, they do have that once per game WOG that gives them a 4-up ward in combat. So we kind of count that as defense because your opponent may not play into you too heavily. You're avoiding that damage. That's not like wounds that you have active all the time. It doesn't help against shooting, for example. But the other reason is just the redundancy. They have so many things that they're okay with losing because they just have more stuff that they can throw at you after it's gone. So that kind of plays into their ability to avoid damage. It's kind of like, imagine you had an army full of liberators. That's it. It's like, and like no matter how many liberators they killed, there's just more marching up the battlefield, and that's kind of what these Bonesplitterz are going for. Mm-hmm. Sustained, you'd think an army like this would have a 4-up rally or something. They don't. They don't resurrect units. They don't revive. They don't heal. So almost no sustain. Poor bravery. Can't even heroic recovery through wounds. Tons and tons of wounds though. It takes a lot of damage. I think you get like 150 plus in a lot of Bonesplitterz lists. They are crazy high wounds, especially when you factor in the 6-up ward that they have and the once per game 4-up ward. It takes a lot of damage to kill a Bonesplitter army, and they're hoping that it takes you so long and they're going to chip away at you while you do it that they can win on objectives while you do that. Mm-hmm. Very high model count as well. I feel like maybe 4 is not doing them enough justice, but like there are armies that are legitimately 5s, and compared to them, Bonesplitterz just aren't quite there.
Yeah, it isn't quite the amount of models. It's more like the wounds for each model plus the amount of units. Right,
because they're 2 wounds per model. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so... Yep, Bonesplitterz are fine. I feel like they haven't really nailed the flavor of this army yet, and I'm hoping a new Battletome kind of comes along and brings up some new kits and gives them more diversity. Really distinguishes all the units from each other and gives them a defined role. I feel like Kruleboyz have better flavor than the Bonesplitterz do at this point.
Yeah, it surprises me that they don't do any kind of prayers, like Togorka Morka or anything. Like, it surprised me that this is the most primal faction, right? A little bit more tribal. And it's said that they're more spiritual even in their text. But there's no priests or anything of the sort. I don't know. Bonesplitterz felt like they got a little bit forgotten. I mean, they got some cool things. There's some really good Bonesplitterz players, and as you probably saw on the battle scroll, a lot of us may not have seen very many Bonesplitterz like locally, and then looked at the battle scroll and like, why did they get a nerf? They needed that nerf.
Because the Wargog Prophet was busted.
Yeah, well, Wargog Prophet, he is like half of the range set there, like just like that 2.5 range. The Wargog Prophet is in there.
Yeah.
This is not about like army strength, like power in terms of win rates or things like this. This is just about faction identity, right? Yeah. So that's why we didn't even want to put like our rankings here. Like we didn't want to call this a C tier army or whatever, because who knows what happens after a battle scroll changes their points and makes them much better. So
GHBs even.
Yeah. This is just about identity, play style, stats for armies especially if you're a new player. All right, Sons of Behemat. So they are large and in charge, and the puny ones are no match. There is no subtlety or tricks needed. Might makes right. There's only a handful of models. You can have lists that are just 4 models, and every single one of them is a huge threat that your opponent has to deal with. They're highly customizable. If you like just having, hero hammer, as people colloquially call it, where you just have a bunch of heroes and they do all the work for you, this is the army to do it. Fantastic sub-factions, tons of customization. Check out our review with Bear from Rerolling Ones. This is a fantastic army. In terms of melee damage, they are not the highest. They are scary, right? When you have a lot of like Ren 2, Ren 3 attacks with high damage, you gotta respect that. But if you look at like per point, 500 points of War Stomper, for example, isn't going to do the same damage that 500 points of Fulminators would do. So it's hard to rank them as a 4, especially because they do have problems applying that damage. They don't have bonus. They don't have like strike first. They don't have a lot of reliable strike last. They kind of struggle sometimes to deal the damage they need to do. So their max damage just isn't that great either, right? There's a lot of armies that are going to do way higher max damage. They have some good quality attacks. Yeah, they're between 3 and 4, somewhere like that. In terms of ranged, this army has a surprising amount of range. You wouldn't think guys with big clubs would have as much range as they do, but they're throwing rocks, they're throwing bodies.
They throw a lot of rocks.
They throw a lot of rocks, yeah. and they have to use that effect because they have to use that as a resource because if they don't, they're just going to fight like 5 liberators and then they're just going to die to the counterattack. So if you use your resources correctly, they actually do have a pretty good ranged component to them. Now, I don't want to say it's good, right? Like, it's not like you make a shooting Gargant army, but like, pay attention to their rocks. You have to pay attention.
It's enough to where even in our review, Bear, I was extremely good Sons of Behemat player, was telling us how he considered, for example, the War Stomper not having a shooting attack as a detrimental con. It's something that he had to consider as part of his list. It's something that they want to have. So they want to have it. It may not be super strong, which is why it's a 2, but it's still good for them and something they want to have. So it's more than just a 1. It's definitely a 2.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
In terms of magic, they have almost nothing. They have no wizards. They can take an artifact in one subfaction that lets them cast an endless spell, and that's it. So that gives them half a point. Yep. No anti-magic, so they're really weak to like debuffing from factions like Soulblight Gravelords, giving you minuses to hit and wound. Really rough for this army. They have
all that blood's going to their muscles, back to their brains.
Yeah, they're thick leg muscles. They're identical thick leg muscles. 5 models, 1 pair of legs. Let's go. They have 1 priest. He's a special character. He has 1 prayer. Can't learn any others because he's a special character. But it's a really good prayer. It's good enough.
Really good.
Yeah, it gives your whole army +1 rend or +2 move. Or what's the third effect that I always forget?
Atavistic
Heals.
Tempest. Healing.
Heals.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and healing on this army is really good because they have a lot of wounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good prayer. That's enough to give it a 3. You can even make it kind of reliable if you kill a monster with him. It becomes a 2+. It's okay. It's more defining than a lot of other armies which have a 0 in prayers.
Right. Yeah.
Speed. These guys, despite having a 10-inch move on paper, they can go fast. They can get bonus. They can run and charge. They can get 3d6 charges. There's a lot of things this army can do. They should not be ignored. They're faster than it looks. Like, you look at Stormcast having a 10-inch move on Fulminators, and you're like, oh, I can play around that. Or like Blood Knights in Soulblight Gravelords, 10-inch move, you can totally play around that. These guys having a 10-inch move is sneaky. Do not trust it.
Yeah.
They can run and charge. They can 3d6 charge. They can go far. Yep.
Yeah.
In terms of mobility, they got pretty much nothing. I think they've got some interesting. What's the one thing? Why did we give them a point?
Longshanks.
Yeah, I think
one thing.
they can walk over certain models only while doing a normal move, though, mind you, not while they're charging. They can walk over some terrain, so that's a little bit of free movement, but they're not real flying. They don't teleport. There's no reserves. There's no retreating and charging. Once they're stuck in, they're stuck in. They have to hope to kill their way out of combats. So these guys do not want to fight like 10 protectors with a Gardas. That is like a nightmare for them.
Or 4 dragons with the castle in the garden.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of defense, you think like, okay, they have a 4+ save, so they're kind of just going to take a lot of damage, right? But because they're all hero models, for the most part, Man Crushers aren't, but the rest of the army is heroes, you can rotate Finest Hour and kind of force your opponent to put damage into things that are defense stacked. So you can, for example, have Mystic Shield through an Arcane Tome, or, yeah, they have no allies, so just Arcane Tome. You can put Finest Hour, and then you can put All-Out Defense, and now you've got a +3 save stacked Gargant, and you can kind of force that into your opponent's front line and be like, no, you have to kill this thing. You can't ignore it. Focused Fire is how you beat this army, but this army also has good tools to avoid that focused fire. So that kind of averages out to about a 3 in defense. If you're not safe stacking correctly, this army is like a 2. It takes a lot of damage. It's like a damage sponge.
It's weird. The simplicity of having fewer models makes it so that an enemy can leverage their damage. Like, we love seeing Gargants, right? Like, we love to put Fulminators and Annihilators into it because we can efficiently put our damage. Like, if you can hit a quarter of an army with one model, like one attack, you would do that every day, right? Like, if you had like an AoE attack somehow. That's kind of what happens with Gargants, where the opposite is also true for them. They're able to present you, whether it's, on an objective that you need to take, or, or just being in your face. They present you with their target, and so their defensiveness comes from their playstyle as well as the tools that can happen. So they're very efficient with their defenses because of AoD, Finest Hour, but it's also the ability to control how damage comes into them.
Yeah. And that's why they get the 3 in defense, yeah. Because if you do it correctly and you manage your resources properly, you're a little bit more durable than a 2 would suggest. In terms of sustain, not much. Broad's Prayer, once per game, and then Heroic Recovery.
Yeah, they're very efficient with it, so it makes them a 1.
Yeah, it's enough.
Yeah.
Tons of wounds, though. Tons and tons and tons of wounds. Especially if you give these guys like an Amulet of Destiny, or if you use the extra +5 wounds command trait, stacked on top of the artifact that gives you a 5+ ward after you've suffered 25 wounds. These guys are just a pile of wounds. And you pretty much have to fully kill them, because they're like, even though they do get weaker, they do degrade. You got to finish them off. So that's where the defense comes in. But yeah, tons of wounds. You need a lot of damage to kill these guys. If you're trying to kill Gargants with only 9 long strikes and a bunch of vanquishers, you're gonna have a bad time. You got to do more damage than what those units can do.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the things we call like the DPS check with Gargants, right? You got to pass the damage check. You have to kill a Gargant every turn, or you're going to lose against this army. It's usually the rule of thumb. And then models, there are 1, obviously. They have the lowest model count in the game. Nothing has less models than this army. The only thing that comes close is like Fyreslayers with pure Magmadroths.
Mm-hmm.
Beastclaw Raiders can get there now.
That's true.
Yeah, well, yeah. Not nearly down to 4 models, though.
All right. Let's talk Maggotkin of Nurgle. Welcome back, Murgok. So Maggotkin are a primarily melee damage army. They are bloated, diseased elites that want to wear you down. They want to spread diseases and summon demons. They have good melee damage, not great, but over 2-3 rounds of combat, they will wear you down. They prefer the pin and win strategy. They want to hold you in place and just rot you down. They have very limited range power. They have a couple spells. They have a couple melee missile attacks. Nothing great. They really want to get in melee with you. They are pretty slow. As a faction, they're a slow army. But right now, Flies, what are they called? Puscoil Blightlords. There is a sub-faction that allows them to get a pre-game move. And I think they're an 8-inch move unit. So you have an 8-inch pre-game move, and then another 8-inch move, and suddenly you're charging turn 1 with an otherwise slow army. Probably fine, like in terms of balance. Seems like a flavor miss, but in terms of external balance, it's not really overpowered or anything. Just seems a little odd. So they have good spells with decent wizards. Their spell lore is pretty good. None of their casters are like exceptional. It seems fair. Like their magic seems fair when you play against stuff like Stormcast. But when you play against like Lumineth and they're unbinding you with like +2, and you're like, cool. Like you're not going to get these spells off against real magic armies. Mobility wise, they can put units in reserve. They can deep strike into play. They don't really have any teleporting, I'm pretty sure. If they do, I haven't seen it.
It's the deep striking.
Yeah, they just have deep striking, which is useful, and that kind of also plays into their defense here. They are pretty decent at avoiding damage, right? They've got 4-up saves across the board. They've got some reserved so they can keep units off the table. They're not spectacular at defense, which sounds weird when talking about Nurgle, but if you remember that we count wounds and wards kind of together, 5-up ward across the army, this army is a pile of wounds. You have to deal so much damage to cut through them, and that can feel like defense, but again, that's just wounds, because it's just more wounds you have to deal in order to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of sustain, they are summoning demons, they are healing a bunch of wounds throughout the game because their diseases heal them as they damage you. That's not the exact game mechanic, but that's kind of how it goes, right? Is they're going to be healing themselves up while they wear you down. And they are summoning demons throughout the game. So they're pretty decent at sustain. Do they have any rally bonuses? I don't recall.
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I can't. If they do, I've never seen them used.
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, super high wounds. They're pretty elite, aside from Plague Bearers being 10 wounds, and you can bring big squads of Plague Bearers and then buff them up with a bunch of stuff. That is an option, but they are a fairly elite army, the Maggotkin of Nurgle.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything else you guys want to say about this one?
This one's really simple, and they did a really good job nailing the flavor, because as you play against this army, it's very much the wear you down is exactly how it feels like to play against this army, and they nailed that aspect with this book. I really enjoy that. That's really what gives their melee up to a 3, because their actual melee damage is probably closer to a 2, right? It's probably
it's pretty bad, yeah.
Yeah, but we include the contagion as part of their melee damage, because it's basically a melee damage effect.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what really gets them up there. They're gonna spend the whole game sitting on objectives, grinding you down, making you not want to be near them while being where you want to be, or coming to you while they do that.
And that's one of the. Yeah, it's definitely. It feels when you play against it, it feels like you're playing an army that is a Nurgle army. Like it plays the way it's supposed to feel.
Mm-hmm. Especially playing a mixed list, it's a really good beginner.
Yeah.
The one thing I think is a flavor miss is the pregame move. I think that's just because it's
flies.
If people aren't playing that subfaction, it's totally on point for flavor.
It seems fine. Yeah, it seems fine.
And again, this is not a statement on power of the army. It just seems like it's weird that Nurgle, being a traditionally slow army in every respect, has this super speed up. And it's toned down from 2nd edition, right? Because they used to be able to run and charge army-wide if they were near their trees. So they've toned it down in this edition. But it's so prominent that it's kind of annoying.
It's kind of the only way people play it as far as the competitive scene goes.
Bloodcott plots in
people
chat.
Playing the getting high results.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Morathi problem in Daughters of Khaine, right? It's like it's hard to think about the faction and not think about Morathi in every single list. That's Nurgle in a nutshell too. Is you can't think about Nurgle and not think about the flies. They're just everywhere. BCP in chat asks, how do you kill 10 Blight Kings? What do you guys think?
Lots of damage. Lots and lots of damage.
Horrorghast, maybe? Something like that.
You're real quiet there,
You need Horrorghast to deal with, like, Blight King.
Horrorghast is really good, yep. If you can force them into a battle shock, they don't have the highest bravery. Fulminators are quite good, even against their defensives. Fulminators do pretty well.
I like rolling 5-ups on dragons, and then it takes a whole guy.
Yeah,
pretty nice.
Yeah. Auto slay effects.
Okay, solid advice.
Yep.
Just throw damage at it. That's the answer to every problem. Just more damage.
Yeah,
obviously.
It's a blight. It's a Mega Gargant level of investment because they are very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, removing wards if you're playing an army that can do that. For example, if you're playing Caradron, that's really useful to remove their wards before fighting into them.
Kruleboyz.
Or Kruleboyz.
Or Kruleboyz.
Kruleboyz, Wind Chargers.
Mm-hmm. All really useful units. The Star Drake eating 3 models per turn, potentially. Yeah, that can happen. Yeah. Also, to keep them tied in melee, I know it seems unintuitive that you don't want to be in melee with them because of the diseases and how that all works. But if you stop engaging them in melee, they're going to rally. And when they revive, 3 Blight Kings, you're going to really just, it's, oh man, I forgot about that ability, right? Just because you don't have bonuses to rally doesn't mean it can't happen.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about Skaven. Does this shape look like anything? It's hard to tell. Like a rat skull, maybe? Skaven are hordes of rats, and they're biotech abominations. They sit around in the sewers of the universe, not physical sewers, but universal sewers, right? They're underneath the physical realm.
Sewers.
Quantum sewers.
Quantum sewers.
They sit around there eating pure chaos stones, and then they got smarter, and then decided to start using magic using that stuff, and then they kept eating it, which because it's so good, why would you stop eating it? So they're just awful. In a good way. They're awful. I hate Skaven, and you should hate them. They have assassins that hide in plain sight. They have wizardess. The Grey Seers and Vermin Lords lead from behind. These super important rats. They're wizened. Everything that they do, everything that's good, really has a chance to backfire, which is really frustrating to play with and play against. But it's fun. It's frustrating but fun because you're well, I'm counting it has the chance to backfire, but I'm going to assume it doesn't and do it anyway. And that's kind of how both players are thinking, both the Skaven player and their opponent. You never know what's going to happen with that. In terms of melee damage, I would say they're not particularly very good at melee. They're not like a Stormcast or Daughters of Khaine level, but they're not slouches either. They can buff up a whole bunch of dudes and do some good melee damage. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not defining them by any means, but they have the capacity to do so. Yeah. I'd say as a faction, they're a lot more focused on their range damage in terms of offensive spellcasting and shooting. They are very good at both of those things. Jezzails, Storm Fiends, lightning cannons. They have a lot of really good shooting units, and then they also have some interesting.
Rattling guns.
Rattling guns, yep. They have good shooting.
Yeah.
They have some issues with threat range. You know, some of their shooting is pretty short range. Some of it is not very accurate. So they can't. But in terms of volume, they can do a lot of damage. They also have pretty good magic. Like I said, they're eating these chaos rocks that are making them more good thinkers, and that helps them be really good casters. They have really powerful spells. What did they change the Scryer one that used to let you reroll hits and wounds? What does it do now? More warp power. What does that spell do now in 3rd edition?
I'll have to look it up. Might be a +1 to hit and wound.
Yeah, it's still a really, really good support ability. So they have powerful buff spells. They can just shoot lightning at you with their spells. Yeah, good magic, good casters. Thankful in particular is a good wizard. They have really good anti-magic, surprisingly. Coming out of this faction, you'd think they'd be good casters but not anti-casters, but it turns out they have really good bonuses to unbinding, so you can do that. Yep. They also have prayers. In particular, they're plague monks. The whole pestilence sub-faction of them has a lot of interesting prayers. I wouldn't say it's really faction defining because it's only if you use that particular sub-faction. But they're good and they're fun. They have prayers. There you go.
Mm-hmm. Ben and Thomas let us know it is +1 to hit and wound.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. Good to know. Speed. Skaven are not particularly fast. They're about as fast as Stormcast in the sense that slow infantry, some fast units here and there, but overall we're still kind of moving up slowly up the board. Not a particularly fast army, but they do have some ability tricks. They can skitter leap their heroes. They have gnaw holes as a terrain, which are like holes in reality that they've dug, and there's like tunnels connected from one part of the battlefield to the other, so they can teleport around through those. Quantum sewers, yep. Yeah. Actually, literally quantum sewers. They like connected to a magic tunnel. It's not like a physical tunnel. It's pretty weird. In defense, they, if you just look at their stats, like they're a 1 in defense. And the reason we gave them a 2, they have terrible saves. They just die in droves. But the reason we gave them a 2 is that unlike a lot of other armies, they have battle shock immunity that doesn't rely on inspiring presence. So their big hordes aren't just going to die if you toss a horror gas in their face. And the other reason we gave them a 2 is because they have cheap disposable stuff that they want to throw in the way. Like their important units are not going to take damage because there's 20 clan rats strung out in a big line in front of it. They cover a lot of space and they can avoid taking damage. So remember that's bodyguard. And bodyguards, yes, they also have bodyguards for their heroes, so you can't just shoot them off the table. So they can
also
go ahead.
They've also got on-demand deep strike because they can bring the tunnelers and drop units out of deep strike.
Yep, that's true. So if they really want to protect a key unit, they can do that. It's expensive. I don't see many people doing it, but they can. You're right. Mm-hmm. In terms of sustain, you'd think an army like this would have a bonus to rally or something. They don't. They don't heal particularly well. Why did we even give them a 1 in sustain?
Because they have that trick with the rat ogres, where if you take a master molder and they die, on a 3-up it comes back.
And hell pit.
Yeah, the hell pit abomination. So there's some things that can take a hit and then keep going.
Yeah.
They're really efficient with rally with 1 wound models.
Yeah, if you have like a squad of 40 or 60, rally can revive a bunch. Combined with your battle shock immunity, you actually have a chance to do it. Okay, that's enough to justify a 1. They are a big pile of wounds, right? You can make a lot of heavy infantry style with Skaven, and you have to chew through a lot of wounds in order to deal with them. Just because you take a lot of damage, you still have to deal a lot of damage. And they can also have pretty high model count. This is actually a really weird army to judge in model count because, like, on one hand, you could go like 120 clan rats, or you could go like 12 storm fiends. So your list building is really, really varied. But they can be a really high model count army, and in general, I think most lists will want to use the clan rats because they are a very useful tool. So it is one of the higher model count armies. Mm-hmm. And their good melee hammers are also like hordes of rats just buffed up and then doing a whole bunch of damage. So definitely a 4 in models. Okay, anything else to say about Skaven?
No, it's a good army. It's an acquired taste army, right? Like you have to really love the models and love the idea of the rules to play them.
You have to be okay with things backfiring, not just failing, but also hurting you.
Yeah, sometimes it's like, okay, I'm going to try to just warp lightning cannon with my dragons. Am I going to take 1 damage, or am I going to take 12? Or is it going to die before I can hit it?
I charged the lightning cannon and it killed itself.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is like an army that you're gonna lose a lot of your models, so you need to be okay with your models dying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's about tactical losing. Okay, Disciples of Tzeentch. So they are the premier offensive magic army. We talked about Lumineth being like the defensive magic masters. These guys are the offensive magic masters. They do very low damage in melee. There's not really many melee threats you need to worry about. Most of their damage is going to come from range, either from missile weapons or from their spells directly. And how this army plays is they want to drown you in mortal wounds from spellcasting, and then drown you in useless things for you to waste your time with horrors. So they are empowered by enemy spellcasters as well. So like not only are you casting your spells and summoning as a result of that, every spell your opponent casts feeds your summoning as well, which is crazy. So like Lumineth versus Tzeentch, two melee armies playing against each other, doesn't matter because whoever, like all the spells being cast just feed Tzeentch all the same. They have mutants and cultists acting as their hammer units. Arguably the best casting army in the game, the most reliable with the best spells. They do rely on magic damage to deal damage from range, and all of that stuff has very specific threat ranges. So you can play around it. Like if you know specific spells from an opponent are 18 inches, you just don't end your turn within 18 inches, and then you engage on them the next turn.
Mm-hmm.
They have
move and cast. So
yeah, movement happens after casting. That's an important thing to know. Both you have to know that when playing this army and when playing against this army. In terms of prayers, none. Speed, they're not particularly fast. They have some faster units, right? Like discs are really fast, but you're mostly looking at like horrors and support heroes and things that aren't going to be moving up the board across the whole board. So can't really call it a fast army. In terms of mobility, I believe they have a deep strike with the Gaunt Summoner. He can bring units out of the Silver Tower. Nothing really to write home about. Defense, this army just takes damage and loves it. They love to take the damage because they have a ton of wounds. Horrors. Dan, you want to explain how horrors work? I'm just going to take care of something real quick.
Yeah, horrors are a very interesting thing because it's actually 50 wounds. You'd think whenever you kill one model from horrors, they split and split again is their ability, and they will turn into more models with more wounds that you have to chew through before you can get to the next model. So it's a big wound saturation, and it's one of the most popular things to summon besides birds, which we'll get to with their summoning here. But defensively, they lack quite a lot. And that's okay for them because they have some of the best summoning in the game. So they'll summon those lines of horrors, and that leads to their playstyle. You can see that they're very heavily focused on ranged and magic. They need to be screening for flamers. They need to be screening for these birds to cast spells because they have the best offensive spells in the game. Lots of mortals, very good at dealing with more elite enemies, as well as those flamers being able to deal pretty high rend. Can get up there. So they're behind those horrors. They just keep gunning you down while you're trying to wade through this horror, this nightmare, trying to get over to them if you're a melee army, especially. So it's just
we're trying to take the objectives.
Yeah, we're trying to take
putting damage into a unit of horrors that are claiming an objective is like a turn and a half of just sitting there spinning your wheels, because every wound you inflict creates another wound worth of model on the objective.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, they only split 3 times, so you're not like infinite splitting or anything, but it's quite an experience to have to play against them. And if you ever shoot raptors into horrors, it's not fun. Like, you never want to have to do that. But thankfully, we can usually get past that and shoot the other things that matter. But I'm just saying, like, it needs to be something that deals a lot of damage, which goes along with their sustain, like we talked about. They're, I think, the best summoning in the game. I don't know, Morgan, do you think there's anything that summons more than Tzeentch does?
Basic Chaos, probably, but yeah.
Even with their following their nerf?
I mean, it's a nerf for sure.
A nerf, but it's like super, like, I think they still have the best summoning, plus, like, combined with their rally. But I would say, like, Tzeentch is pretty close, particularly because in their summoning sub-faction, it's just so impactful, like, their summoning. The fact that they can just summon a Lord of Change turn 1 is pretty gross.
Yeah.
Like, purely through summoning, their sustain is a 4. Like, they don't rally well, they don't revive models, they don't heal very well. It's just summoning. Yeah.
Like, they're just continuously doing it on their turn and your turn,
Yeah, super high wound count, pretty good model count, I would say as well. You guys were talking about like shooting long strikes into horrors. That's sometimes that increases the number of models on an objective because like a regular horror splits into 2 blue horrors.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Crazy. So this is one of those like frustrating armies to play against. Oh, what a coincidence that all the magic armies are frustrating to play against.
This one's definitely, it's a very techie army. It's one, I think out of all the like more techie magic armies, I actually think this one would be a really cool one for a beginner to play. I don't know what you guys think. Or you think it's too...
You just get overwhelmed. Like if you're playing this army against Ironjawz, for example, like that's the standard is like you have to, if you can beat Ironjawz, you can beat a lot of stuff in this game. This army just like struggles, especially right now in this season. I know we're not counting seasonal rules, but it has to be said that Bounty Hunters just destroys horrors and really is keeping Tzeentch back. They are going to be really scary next season. Yep. Vanquisher's only doing 1 damage a piece. Like, we're going to have to commit Fulminators to kill horrors. That's awful.
That feels so bad. But thankfully we can shoot birds fairly well. So, there's little things.
Yeah, and Kairos got nerfed. Thank God. Small miracles. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. This is a more techie army. It's less punishing on mistakes, I would say, than other armies like Kruleboyz or Lumineth. But
Yeah,
it
that's
is.
what I was thinking.
It's still pretty punishing. Like you just get overwhelmed pretty easily if you're not putting your damage where you need to. Because the problem with the spells in this army is that they're going to do like D3 mortal wounds or D6 mortal wounds or like specific amounts of wounds. They're not going to do like the mass damage you need to get through like 100 Beasts of Chaos, right? Like you have to allocate your resources very carefully with this army and plan ahead. Just fitting for the god of change and scheming and planning and all that stuff. Okay. Next up, Slaves to Darkness. So they got a new book, technically. It's not, like, the official Battletome is not out yet, but we've seen the limited edition release, and that's, I think, enough to go off of for this. So, looking at Slaves to Darkness, they are, well, flavor first, right? Might and magic makes right. You gain the favor of the dark gods, and then you lay waste. They have big armor and big weapons like Stormcast. They have, unlike Stormcast though, they have armored elites and they're supported by cultists and marauders. So you have this like super cheap chaff units that you can add into your army, which is very interesting. You have this mechanic called Eye of the Gods that allows you to upgrade your heroes throughout the game as you kill enemy heroes or take objectives. Sometimes it's an upgrade, sometimes it kills you and replaces you with a weird mutant thing. Their heroes actually feel really heroic because they're doing a lot of interesting stuff with heroic actions, and they're using more heroic actions than most armies would, whereas normally you use one. This army can use multiples sometimes. Really customizable because every unit in the army can take a Mark of Chaos, and depending on which god you pick, they can serve a new role. So you could, for example, give a unit a Khorne Mark for it to deal more damage, or a Nurgle Mark to be tougher, or a Slaanesh Mark to be faster, or you can go wildcard and go Tzeentch Mark, and now it can teleport around and do wacky stuff. So really customizable army, super fun to build lists with this because there's so many possibilities. And let's break down their stats. Very good melee, definitely better melee than Stormcast Eternals. They have like the damage output of Stormcast, arguably a little bit better, but then they also have combat tricks on top of that, right? You've got stuff like fighting twice. You've got things like fighting first, and then a retinue fights first. You've got baseline, Ren 2, Ren 3 attacks, so higher accuracy. So it's like everything good about Stormcast melee. Slaves are like a little bit better than that, and it's spooky. Thankfully though, they have almost no ranged power, almost zero. So if they're not using their combat tricks effectively, if they're not using charged mortal wounds properly, you can just screen them out, and that's how you play against them. But then they're also pretty defensible, so that kind of plays into it. In terms of magic, they're good at casting, like better than Stormcast. They care about their spells more than Stormcast, right? Like you want demonic speed to go off. You want your warp reality to go off to teleport a Tzeentch unit. You care more about your spells. Like with Stormcast, you could just not have spells and still do okay. I feel like Slaves kind of don't do that. You want magic. You want this like dark magical power to make your units useful. Like if you don't have demonic speed, I don't think you're charging turn one, which means you're just getting shot.
And they have an entire heroic action based around charging up their magic and getting it off. It's that important to
Yeah, it's more important, and they're better at it. It's not as good as, say, like other Magic armies. Maybe it should be a 3 instead of a 2.5. But it's 3 maybe.
Yeah, it's probably a 3.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those situations where this, because of the variety in the slaves book, you can go a very Magic heavy army, and it's going to beat out the bulk of the armies in the game, with the exception of things like Tzeentch and Lumineth. Or you cannot do that and then have almost no Magic. So I think 2.5 is fine.
I think it's part of the faction's identity. I think it's a utility spell that they very, very really need to get off sometimes. It's like, if we were facing an army that has -1/2 wound, we would really, really want Celestial Blades to go off. And
Right.
they really need Demonic Speed to go off. So I think 2.5 sounds about right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They do have a unit that has priests. They don't have a prayer scripture. The priest is like the war shrine, and it just does a prayer depending on what mark you have. And there's a lot of flexibility there, but it's not like army defining, and it's not even that particularly strong. Like, even though the buffs that you get from it are pretty good, like it's just okay. Like, I don't know if I would even bring a war shrine. 6-up ward is nice. Like, it's okay. Maybe like a 1 or 2, something like that for prayers. It's not like an army defining feature by any means.
Right.
In terms of speed, they're a fast army. They're like Idoneth fast, if you set it up properly, if you get your demonic speed off, if you play the right sub-faction. Otherwise, you have like a lot of 4 or 5 inch infantry that aren't going anywhere. So 4 is don't look at this and think, oh, I'm going to charge every unit turn 1. This is like, they're fast if you do it right, and you should. That's part of the faction identity, because there's multiple sub-factions that focus on mounted units. They have a sub-faction that every mounted unit can run and charge. Awesome. They have a spell that gives a unit that is mounted a 3d6 charge, which means you charge up to 18 inches instead of 12. Like, you add these things together, and this army is charging you on turn 1. It is getting across the battlefield easily. Mobility-wise, though, they're not looking too great. They do have a few tricks, like they don't really have any reserve units. I think they can ally in the Gaunt Summoner on disc. Is that a thing that they can do?
They can use the Gaunt Summoner, yeah.
Yeah. So they can do that. That's a possibility.
You don't need to ally.
Yeah, they have their own.
Okay.
They have their
and
own.
he has the Silver Tower thing as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can put some units in reserve, and then you have the Warp Reality thing. But all the mobility comes from Tzeentch, right? So it's like specific units doing it. It's not like it's not the core of the army, right? You're not.
It's super ironic that Tzeentch itself doesn't have teleports.
Yeah.
The slaves do, but not like Tzeentch itself.
Yeah. Defenses. I think Slaves of Darkness are one of the better defensive armies in the game. You've got Armored Elites that have 3+ saves. You've got like Nurgle Mark for a -1 to wound against melee attacks. The problem is that, and they also have a 5+ ward against mortal wounds, which is really nice. But the problem is that, like, compared to something like Stormcast, which we also have 3+ saves, but we save stack a lot better because we have the lantern and
We have more sources.
Yeah, we have more sources of save bonuses. We can dip into Astral Templars to get immune to roars and things like that. It just feels like a little bit worse than Stormcast durability. Maybe 4 is a bit too low. Maybe it should be 4.5. But like, this army doesn't really have a regular ward unless you bring a War Shrine, whereas Stormcast have Gardas for a 5+ ward. So it just feels like
their cultists will be lower save. Is the other
the cultists are also like, you can go full elite and have a whole army of 3+ saves, but you also do want like cheap disposable stuff because it's cheap, and it's like, do you want to bring a unit of 10 Chaos Warriors for 220 points to hold an objective, or would you rather bring 85 points of Marauders to hold the objective? Like, the objective gets held all the same. So you're going to mix it up. So it's
or you're bringing Splintered Fang because you want the damage, but they're like a 5-up save.
Right.
So...
So they're tough. They're sturdy. I don't want to give people the impression that they're not sturdy just because they're not as good as Stormcast. They have bodyguards for heroes, but those heroes, they don't really matter. The ones that they're bodyguarding, like Chaos Lords, like, who cares? You don't care about bodyguards on them. They can put cheap screens in your way, which is good. They have good saves. They can save stack pretty well because they can get their basic troops from like 2+, ignoring Rend 1, and then -1 to wound, and then -1 Rend if you go Nurgle Banner. There's things you can do to improve their defense for sure.
Mm-hmm. But you're giving up on other things.
Right.
But where they excel is definitely sustain.
Yes, yeah. The fact that you can get a 5+ rally now in a subfaction, like all your armored elite dudes are rallying on a 5+. So Chaos Knights, Chaos Warriors, Chosen, I believe, are all rallying on a 5+. Like imagine if Stormcast could rally back Fulminators on a 5. That's just how ridiculous this is. And in addition to that, they're also reviving. There's a subfaction that allows you to revive a unit of cultists that have been destroyed, which is a powerful ability that really shouldn't be ignored. So overall, this army has more sustain once they're in combat, which is, I think, how they're differentiated from Stormcast. So Stormcast are hit big, and then, hopefully we did enough damage that our defenses make us survive. These guys get hit harder, but then they sustain it better, especially against shooting, right? They're more durable against shooting than Stormcast are.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of wound count, they're about the same, right? They have more wounds than Stormcast would typically, but they don't have access to wards. They do. It's a crappy ward. It's not very good. It's a 6+ ward on the shrine, so not that useful. In terms of model count, they have more models than Stormcast because their cultists come in squads of 10, warriors come in squads of 10, Chaos Knights come in squads of 5 compared to our Fulminators, which come in squads of 2. So they definitely feel like a 3 on that. So.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Show pointing out in chat, you can deep strike any unit with Mark of Tzeentch and Gaunt Summoner. Yep. Some of their mobility for sure.
That was the mobility, yeah. That's what got them to a 2, was the ability to teleport with Mark of Tzeentch, with Warp Reality, and the Gaunt Summoner.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those are...
Oh, it's really good on Knights, especially, because they get a minimum 5-inch charge. Well, you change one of their dice, right? So it's like
to a 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool mechanic. You can deep strike in a bunch of Knights, and then they have a pretty reliable charge out of that. Now,
the counterplay, though, is that if the Gaunt Summoner gets killed before you drop those units, they're dead.
And this army can't really stop shooting damage. They don't have something that lets them ignore that. The Gaunt Summoners can't use bodyguards of any kind. So if you try that against Stormcast or Lumineth, they're like, oh, which is the unit that has the unit in reserve? That one? Okay. It's gone. Right? Yeah. It can be risky. You just don't put them in reserve against those armies, right? But then it's you've given that unit the Tzeentch mark, and what else is it doing for you at that point? There's always trade-offs here.
Yep, everything is trade-offs with this army, which I think is what makes it a lot more balanced than some people see. Some people see, oh, there's this Khorne mark and Nurgle mark and Slash mark. It's well, but you only get one of those per unit. Mm-hmm. And you have to build around that and know which units are which, that you can use, position them properly. So it's not just the army. The army was definitely almost misconstrued when people first saw some of the leaks for rules.
Oh, we were
as being the host too strong.
This army generated an unbelievable amount of salt from everyone, from Stormcast players, from non-Stormcast, from Slaves players. Everyone got upset about this book.
Still, though, I think when this finally gets fully in play, this army is going to do very well.
100%. No,
yeah,
I just think it's not.
This is a strong army.
Very beginner friendly too. Love it. If you're looking for an army to play, this is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Stormcast without shooting, which arguably is harder to play than Stormcast, frankly. But
really easy to collect too. Unless you're a high skill player, all you need is 3 start collecting boxes. Yep. And then maybe buy yourself a couple, either the Demon Prince or the Sorcerer Lord, and that's it. Really easy to collect this army.
Well, and the army is really great for kit bashing and conversions.
Oh yeah,
because it's just a bunch of dudes in armor, so they can have whatever you want to give them.
Yeah, very customizable aesthetics, kind of like Stormcast.
Yeah.
We should also talk about the coalition unit problem or the ally problem with this army.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about it. Get it out there. This army benefits from all the armies that use Khorne Mortal or Nurgle Mortal or Slaanesh Mortal keywords. And it makes some of these units ridiculous. An 80-point Bloodstoker from Khorne gives a unit re-rolling wound rolls of 1, +3 to charge, and +3 to run as well, I believe, right? It's an insane power multiplier because you can make Khorne marked Chaos Knights, and now they have running charge from Host of the Everchosen, so they're going D6 +3 +10, then having a 3d6 charge +3.
Before we get too crazy into the stats, if you're looking at this video for the first time and you're looking at the army and you don't know what it does, the Chaos armies can all ally with each other, and in particular, Slaves is really good because it can take coalition units from pretty much the entire Chaos subfaction.
No, so
Slaves
slaves.
doesn't have coalition.
Allies.
It's
Wait,
Allies.
Is it just allies now?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's always been just allies.
yeah,
Other-
so all the dedicated chaos armies can coalition in slaves.
Oh,
so
slaves. It's the other way around. Yeah.
yeah, so Tzeentch could take like 10 chaos knights and then have to give them Mark of Tzeentch. And there are buffs in those chaos books that only apply to Tzeentch units and not, disciples of Tzeentch units. So I think I'm pretty sure, because I read Shield of Fate, which is one of the really good disciples of Tzeentch spells, they could ally in 10 chaos knights and put a Shield of Fate on them, which is pretty good.
Yeah, it is good.
Yeah.
The big thing that is causing some heartburn at the moment are the Blades of Khorne heroes being allied in and stacking all of these really powerful early 2nd edition buffs on a 3rd edition army. And we're all pretty much of the assumption that that is going to get nerfed very quickly.
If it doesn't get nerfed, that is objectively the correct way to play this army, and it's no longer slaves to darkness, it's slaves to Khorne.
Slaves to Khorne.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's why we're assuming this is going to change, because they've proven that they have a good idea for what internal faction flavor and identity should be. Like, that's kind of why we did this whole live stream here, is because they've been nailing faction identity. We kind of just wanted to express that to people. Like, there's no army that's like good at everything. Everything has strengths and weaknesses. But yeah, Khorne kind of just tips the scales a little bit too much. So we'll see what happens after they get a new book. It is an issue right now if you're getting into the army. By the time you have your army painted up and ready for games, might not even be a problem. Honestly, the Khorne book is probably coming out. What was the timeline?
Well, because we have
spring?
2 chaos ones coming by summer, so
Yeah,
Khorne and Slaanesh is coming this summer.
yeah, that's all that's left.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that probably won't be an issue in a few months. But just to, for the sake of time stamping it right now, it is a bit of an issue. And that's actually one of the reasons we've delayed our slaves review, is we kind of want to see where everything lands in the new year. If it looks like, Khorne book is going to change things, then that's going to change our review, right? If we do a full review and we say every list starts with a Bloodstoker and Mark of Khorne and Varangard or something, not a really good review if they change it 3 months later. So, all right. Let's move into the Death faction. So we did include Soulblight Gravelords here, even though that's not technically a 3rd edition Battletome. It's so close to being 3rd edition, might as well talk about it, right? So what's the flavor of the Soulblight Gravelords? We've got overwhelming hordes of shambling monstrosities. Vampires and necromancers lead dark hosts. They have swarms of shadowy bats and wolves. And that if you want to play like gothic horror, zombies, skeletons, vampires, zombie dragons, all that stuff is wrapped into this single faction, and it's really, really cool. In terms of stats, they rely on melee damage, but they're not the strongest melee damage in the game. What they want to do is fight you over like 4 rounds, and they want their melee damage to be good enough to kill you eventually, and you're going to kill them because they're not, you can see the defense stat over there isn't very good. But where they excel is their sustain. This is like the premier sustain army in the game. Everything heals and revives, and even after you destroy it, it's going to come back to life and keep doing it. They can summon more stuff on top of that. Like, I think Gorslav just adds new units to the table, right? Or does he revive destroyed units? I forget.
He revives a destroyed unit.
Okay.
Yeah. So instead of having to roll a dice, you just spend a command point.
That's what it
He
is.
just does it.
Yeah, so they're summoning stuff, they're reviving stuff, they're healing stuff. It's attrition. Attrition is the name of the game with this army. You're gonna win. We had this great interview with Levon after he got he plays so well at LVO. Yeah, and he that's what this army is all about. It's attrition and tactics and like 200 IQ plays. You got to be really tactical with this army because you're not going to win through brute force. You're not going to win through ranged power, that's for sure, because they got almost none. You're not going to win through speed because they're not a particularly fast army. They have some faster units, but what they excel at is attrition, body count, wearing you down over time, and doing it primarily through buffs and debuffs with magic. Yeah, so their magic is great. They have a great spell lore. They have great casters. Not the best in the game, right? Like, some armies are over here with like +3 to cast, and I think vampires are capping out at like +1 or something. Not like the best wizards, but their spell lore is just so good. And they like necromancers and vampires. All these guys are wizards. It's definitely a central part of the army, and you're going to rely on it. So 4 seems about right for identity.
Yeah. Not to say that you can't get extra bonuses, because like the Legion of Blood Foot Vampire can get to a +2 to cast it.
Right. Yeah, you can, for sure.
But almost all the wizards get a bonus to cast. And some of them can stack additional bonuses. So their spells are really reliable.
Yeah, you've got like corpse carts rolling around. You know, there's definitely things you can do.
Totally.
And they're not super high cast values either.
Right.
No, they are not.
And they still have that mechanic where if you cast on a 10+, you double the effect of the spell, or you resolve it again. I remember that in 2nd edition. I haven't played that much against Soulblight this edition. Probably.
I don't remember that.
All right, well.
Being the case.
Prayers.
It's been a while since I played them.
They got no prayers, so no need to worry about that. Speed. So they're, really slow infantry. Skeletons, zombies, all this stuff is pretty slow. Can't run and charge. It's got like 4 or 5 inch move, I think. But they do have some faster units, right? You've got Blood Knights, you've got some Flyers, you've got some Zombie Dragons, you've got units that want to move up. So I don't want to call them as slow as a Stormcast army because they definitely feel like they are
They have
generally...
buffs for that as well, for speed.
Yeah. So they're generally a little bit faster than a Stormcast army. Nothing to write home about. Like, you're not worried about them crossing the table turn 1. Mobility.
And yes, to your question is yes, they get to resolve Lore of Death and Lore of Vampires twice on a 9+.
Right. Yeah, so I think that's why we gave them a 4 in Magic, right? Like, they're just good wizards, and it's a... Yeah. In terms of mobility, they can deep strike some units with a specific subfaction. They can deep strike units through graveyards, right? They've got... does they also have a pre-game move in one of the subfactions? Or what am I thinking of? No, they don't. All right, I see the look on your faces.
I don't think so.
Okay.
There are a lot of deep strike mechanics in this army.
Yes.
They also have a fair amount of flying units, and being able to like fly over enemies, fly over terrain. That's a useful form of mobility. In terms of defense, skeletons and zombies die quick, real quick. They have no battle shock immunity, like some other horde armies. So you kill, 20 skeletons, the other 10 run away. You kill 30 zombies, the other 30 run away. It's pretty rough. If you can kill the stuff that's going to give them Inspiring Presence. Zombies, in fact, can't even give themselves commands. So if you just snipe the hero that would give them Inspiring Presence, boom, commands are gone. The Horror Gas does work against this army really badly. So they just take damage. So why did we give them a 2 in defense? Well, it's because they have some durable units, right? Like Blood Knights are pretty durable. They can tank some stuff. They also just have tons of disposable stuff, like Dire Wolves as a cheap battle line that you just throw in the way of stuff and you don't care what happens to it. Stuff like that is like Liberators for us, right? It's avoiding damage on your key units. So that helps them with that respect. But really where this army shines is in sustain, in wounds, and in models. That's money. Just max out that chart, that side of the chart. Some kind of purple comet type situation.
6 in sustain, like.
Well, they are the 5 in sustain. They do everything the best, right? They revive destroyed units. They revive slain models. They have big units for rallies, like 60 zombies rallying back is not a bad command point.
Summon sometimes.
Summon stuff sometimes.
Radikar summoning wolves.
Yeah. Well, and this is definitely good, especially when you're playing against them. This is an army where you have to kill what you go into, because if you don't, it's just going to come back. And even if you do kill it, it's
going
just going to come back. It's just going to come back. So the thing here is that you have to delete them off objectives and then try to keep them away from getting back onto them again. Otherwise, you're just going to drown in a sea of dead men.
Yeah.
The big thing I've noticed is denying the space, like thinking in advance, not just moving to kill the models, right? Like you're moving directly like from your model the shortest distance to their models. Sometimes I'm moving, if I get a big charge, I'm moving around their models so I can get into positions to where they can't revive models and take an objective easily or put it in a safe place, right? So I'm forcing them to make decisions based on what I'm doing, right? Make them react to you rather than you react to them, which is very important.
And that's really important because all of their deep strike and revive mechanics have specific limitations about where they can go. And so if you can deny the prime choices for where they're going to want to set these units up, then that only leaves them a couple of options, and those options are normally not very good.
Yep. Like reviving models within, however many inches of a model. If you're on that model and you surround it in any way, they can't bring that unit back, even if they want to.
Yeah.
Or if you're surrounding their graveyards, they're trying to bring something back.
But that's resources you got to spend, right? So
yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is going to happen, but you can control your opponents with that and make sure they don't get onto the objectives that are important.
Yeah. Now, we gave Gargants and Nurgle a 5 in wounds, but honestly, this is the 5 wound army. This is the best, yes. Right? You bring 180 wounds, 200 wounds, 220 wounds in some cases to a game, and all of it has a 6+ ward. It's so frustrating.
In this game, I'm not worried. I'm never worried about Soulblight tabling me. It's that I'm worried about losing the game on points. Like,
right.
I have to chew through everything.
I can't kill them fast enough to win the game.
Yeah, playing dragons is rough.
This was such a threat. We've been talking about this army for like a year, right? Like, you have to pass the Gargant DPS check, which is a unique kind of DPS check, but then you also have to pass the 180 zombie DPS check as well.
So, but if you look at where the game is right now, Soulblight is doing very poorly, and I think one of the big reasons, bounty hunters, but also remember that this is post Horrorghast change. Because Horrorghast really punishes these big blocks of zombies and skeletons.
Yeah, and it's typically cast out of unbinding ranges too, which is the rough part. Because they like to keep their wizards back. They don't have any frontline unbinders, Yeah.
Horrorghast.
Yes.
I don't think it's Horrorghast. I think shooting just got a lot better across a lot of other armies. I think range just got a lot, and it can just like snipe out Soulblight heroes.
I think Horrorghast is a factor. I don't think it's the only thing, but it's definitely a factor.
Sure.
Yeah. Model count. This army has huge model count. They're always on every objective all the time. They just don't leave empty stuff. Like some armies have to leave objectives empty. This one doesn't. There's always something nearby. Yeah. Would you guys recommend this army for beginners, given what we've talked about?
Actually, so I'd recommend certain builds for beginners.
Yes.
That's the thing. I wouldn't recommend this, like, if you're a beginner and you want to, like, someone who wants to dive into something more competitive, I wouldn't recommend this one because it plays really difficultly, like, in a really difficult way. But as far as, like, building a basic Soulblight army, I think it's actually a pretty good beginner point that can grow into something really cool.
I wouldn't recommend it, especially for a new player in Garage Hammer. Absolutely, it's totally fine.
Yeah, if there's no time limit,
there's no time limit. There's no time limit. Right? This army, because of the size of the models, has a reputation for playing very slow. And if you're a new player who's learning the game and really thinking about what you're doing that with an army that's fairly slow to play is probably not the best the best idea.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah,
because you're never going to finish a game, right?
I don't think a beginner army. I think there's a lot of models to paint if you want to start. So like just off of that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about Nighthaunt. Nighthaunt are the army of spooky ghosts, and I love it. They have some of the best flavor, and their mechanics reflect it. So they are malignant spirits that emerge from where you least expect them. Crashing tide of ghosts just charge through walls into your front lines. They have a lot of really cool faction-specific stuff, like you can put 3 units in reserve. Oh, there's a typo, dang. Reserver. Put 3 units in reserve after deployment, so like after everything has already been set up, you take like this unit, boop, they're in reserve. And your opponent's already deployed thinking those units were going to be somewhere. Now they're in reserve. Now they're coming on the table anywhere. And that's really cool. Everything's flying. Everything can retreat and charge all the time. Everything has a 4+ save. Some things are a little bit better or worse, but mostly 4-up saves. Everything ignores all rend. Everything is, kind of slow. 8-inch moves, Yeah. So let's look at their stats. They definitely rely on melee. This is a melee-centric army. They are also pretty good at it. Better than some, worse than others. I think right now with the seasonal rules, they feel really good because people are using Scarlet Doom and charging things to death. I think after that change, they're still going to be about, they're still going to rely on melee damage in order to get the game done because their ranged is not good. They do have a unit that shoots specifically. It's not very good. Maybe in the next book it might get changed, but it's really inefficient. There is some screaming action, like you can have banshees that scream stuff to death. But overall, their ranged is not very good. I would even say it's worse than like Gargants, right? It's not very powerful.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
At least the Gargant shooting is good.
Yeah, it's like Ren 3 rocks or something.
Yeah, it's not high volume, but it's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah. The Nighthaunt do have wizards, and they use wizards. They use like 1 or 2 wizards in every game, and they have one of the best spell lores in the game. Like 3 or 4 outstanding spells out of 6, and the other ones aren't like bad by any means. Like they have good spell lore. The problem is they just don't have any bonuses to casting or unbinding. And they do have that really awesome artifact that lets them auto cast in the spell once per game. So like, it's about what Stormcast consider magic to be, right? It's like a 2. Like they're not particularly good at it. They don't bring that many wizards, even though their spell lore is really good, and they just get shut down by other magic armies. So even like non-magic armies shut them down sometimes with a good unbind. So
like Reignor or something to build for it.
Yeah, you have to build for it specifically. Yeah. No prayers, no priests. Easy. Speed. We've talked about Nighthaunt specifically as an example of speed versus mobility. 8-inch move across the board seems good, especially compared to some units moving only 4 or 6 inches per turn. But this is an aggressive melee army, and when you're only moving 8 inches per turn, pretty much what you're doing on your first turn is you're hoping you make 9-inch reserve charges, like you put your units out of reserve and you hope they charge in. Otherwise, you're just running up the board into the middle of the board, and you're not charging after that. So it's not charging reliably turn 1. Even after they get engaged, they kill stuff, then they still only move 8 inches after that. They're not a fast army, right? And they have some units that can go fast, right? Like Hex Wraiths are super fast. They go 24 inches and they can run on top of that. So they're super fast. Black Coaches are, I think, 10-inch move and they teleport every turn. Like there's some faster stuff, but overall as an army, they're not particularly fast.
Yeah, they basically have the same sort of speed that you get out of Lumineth.
Pretty much, yeah. Lumineth want to play more defensively. These guys want to play offensively.
Yeah, but they play the reverse, right?
Right?
These guys are offensive. Lumineth want to play defensive.
Right. Yeah. Mobility wise, they're exceptional. They're one of the most mobile armies. You can't tie them down. Everything retreats in charge. Everything flies. Like if you don't very carefully measure your ranges, they're just going to jump over your front line and start fighting stuff behind it. Then they're going to retreat away from that and charge even deeper into your lines. And sometimes just charging stuff is going to be enough to kill it. Like you have to play super careful against Nighthaunt, which 8-inch move is kind of the limiting factor there, thankfully. But yeah, every time they charge, they debuff the units that they charge with their Wave of Terror. And that's pretty much how they do their damage, which is, I think, probably that's holding them back from being a 4 in melee, because sometimes you just roll really poorly on Wave of Terror, or you only have like 1 unit charging, so you cap out at Ren 2 on your guys, and you're fighting into like 2+ saves, and you just don't quite get there in terms of damage. They want a lot of units charging, but they're also an elite army, so that's kind of holding them back. I know we listed them as models 4, but that's probably should be a models 3. Honestly, they're not that high in model count. Yeah, what else do they do? They're flying. Right, everything is flying, everything's retreating and charging. Super mobile army. They can teleport their heroes around. Some of their heroes just have built-in teleports. Others can just cast a spell that teleports them. There's the Black Coach is a unit that just teleports every turn. So like this is a really mobile army. Really crazy. Hard to predict where they're going to be. They can just be wherever they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
In terms
right
of
now,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say right now in terms of like melee, they're probably a little higher than what's on there, but we were doing this without seasonal things. I think next season you'll definitely see them be more of a 3.5 melee. Mm-hmm. I think some people might see that and be like, wait, really?
Well, right now, like Scarlet Doom just charges you to death and then fights you at like Ren 3 or Ren 4 if you have a Purple Sun, right? So like, it doesn't feel like a 3.5 melee, but after seasonal rules are gone, you will see it. Yeah, they don't fight in 2 ranks anymore. That drops off a lot. Yeah. In terms of defense, this army is sturdy. They have a spell to give a unit -1 to be wounded. Everything ignores all rend. So like your 10 blocks of ghosts need 20 damage to kill. More because of the ward, right? That's effective wounds. This is a durable army. And when they want to stack durability in a particular point, they just bring 30 ghosts and try to tie down as much stuff as possible. Give it that 5-up ward to give it a huge amount of wounds. You have to deal a lot of wounds to this army. And that plays well into the fact that they revive very well. If you don't wipe out the unit, a hero nearby is going to revive 3 models at the end of the combat phase. And that's every combat phase. Like, even if you didn't fight them, let's say you're just shooting them for a turn, well, they're going to revive 3 models anyway. There's no point in doing any damage to this unit until you're able to wipe it out completely. Because one of my experiences against this army has been, I'll shoot them, they'll get down to 1 model, right? After a battle shock, after everything, they get down to 1 model. And then at the end of that turn, after Yeah, at the end of that turn, they revive 3. And then it's their turn, they revive 3, and then they get a double, they revive 3, and they rally it on both of their turns. So, like, you get, like, oh, man, it's so frustrating. So, like, yeah, you have to massively overkill this army, so they have high points in sustain and high points in defense. Probably should be, like, a 3.5 in sustain. Comparing it to, like, Slaves to Darkness seems about right. And they have really high wounds. You have to deal a lot of damage, right? A squad of 30 ghosts with a 4+ ethereal, that on its own is 60 wounds you have to deal effectively on average. You add a 5+ ward on top of that, that's effectively 90 wounds to just like 300 points of ghosts or whatever, or 480-ish of ghosts, or somewhere around there, 450. Yeah, that's a lot of wounds. Maybe not like on paper, it's not a lot of wounds, but when you add in the ward, it's a lot of effective wounds. It's rough. And then in terms of model count, they're a higher model count army. Easy to paint, though. I would totally recommend this army for beginners. One of the problems with Soulblight is that you just have too many models, but with this army, you're like, yeah, 60 ghosts and some heroes, I'm good. Like, it's not that bad.
Sucks.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Hope you're using plastic glue. That's all I can say. Yeah. Would you guys recommend this army to beginners?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
This one's really easy.
You know, yeah, it's a bit techy in terms of like screening and like what spells to cast, but the logic applies of just you're trying to kill him with ghosts, and because of its mobility options like retreat and charge, and the file ward, it's actually friendly for new people.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. This is an army. Yeah.
Well, this army can't get tied up, so you're fine.
Yeah. You don't get punished as bad for poor positioning, poor pile-ins and stuff like that, because you can always fix it. It's fairly forgiving as far as like incoming damage goes. It's easy to paint, easy to collect. There's lots of Nighthaunt out there. So yeah. And like you were saying, right? Like you really want to learn how to screen and how to set up. Well, those are skills that you want to master regardless of what army you're playing. And so if you have an army that makes that easy because you've got cheap, easy screens access to them, and you want to use those, it will make you a better player down the road.
Yep. This army teaches you the basics really quickly because it's so forgiving for mistakes. You'll catch yourself making the mistake, but then it's okay because this army has a way out. Like, oh, I got tied down. Like you're playing Ironjawz and you accidentally make a wrong pile-in, right? Like, doesn't exist with this army. You just always retreat and charge.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it for 3rd edition Battletomes. I think we didn't include ogres because they're just weird.
There's no FAQ for it yet.
So
we don't know what's going to change.
Yeah, I think the only reason we included slaves is because they added that day 1 FAQ. Like if they didn't have that, and you could have a 4+ army or 4+ rally in that army, and like the banners work the way they're written and not as per the errata. Yeah, that army's a lot more powerful. So I think we felt more comfortable doing that army's identity because of the errata. Whereas ogres are just, they seem wonky, man. It doesn't seem right.
Best shooting in the game.
Yeah, it's definitely a shooting 5.
Feels like it. For different reasons than Stormcast,
melee. Yeah, for different reasons, but definitely shooting 5.
We'll
Probably,
see.
What, a melee, 3.5 maybe? Not quite a 4?
4 because essentially every
still?
even their artillery.
That's fair,
Yeah, the artillery doesn't fight good, though. I know, because I just did it last night, and it went very poorly.
It charges good, but it doesn't fight good.
Not if you roll triple 4s on 3 Iron Blasters, it doesn't.
Well,
I mean,
barring Jack rolling.
I know.
Their artillery. I'll put it that way.
So could you say that?
Yeah, no, it fights better than any other artillery, that's for sure.
Sorry, Magan, could you repeat that? You got cut off.
Oh, I think the artillery fights better than any other shooting unit artillery.
Totally.
Like tools, it's actual like weapons that do 2 damage.
Yeah. Okay, so let's that's it for this live stream. We've covered all the topics. Want to give a special shout out to our sponsor, Kaiju Gaming. Remind people here again, and maybe you missed it at the start of the stream, we have cool merch. If you want some dice with some cool logos designed by our patrons, or if you want access to like these rangefinders that we've got, check out Kaiju Gaming Lounge. They're really cool. They are shipping worldwide. If there's problems with the shipping on the website, just message them on Discord and they clear that up right away. Yeah. Anything you guys want to finish off with?
Well, on that, please join our Discord. It is an
yeah.
awesome place to discuss all things Warhammer. We do have channels for each of the factions that we put out. We try to put out a channel for each 3.5 book, or 3.0 book. Sorry, it's in my head. You've done this to me. 3.5 book. Anyways, yeah, we have a channel for each one, so even if you don't play Stormcast and you like some of the discussion we had here, our discussion is pretty good in our Discord. If you're a Stormcast player especially, we have several archetypes. And if you're just getting started, it's a great place to start. Get into the list workshop and get some help. Our community is really awesome about helping, and we try to jump in there as much as we can as well.
Yep.
And
The YouTube.
go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say I was going to put the radar charts for each faction in the channels, each respective channel. Probably pin them. So if you don't want to constantly rewatch this live stream, if you want to go back to this oh, jeez. Good thing I'm getting a new mic soon. Yeah, so if you don't want to go through this live stream constantly, you can just dip into the Discord. It'll be pinned there in the channel for each faction, so that'll be helpful.
And as always, we really appreciate the discussion. So if you think we were right, we were wrong, we missed anything, please put that in the comments below. We do look at those. We do appreciate the feedback and the discussion from the community. And like, subscribe, bell, notifications, all the algorithm stuff. We always appreciate that as well. So you guys have a good afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Sorry about the technical troubles at the start of the stream. I don't know what was going on there.
You guys.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. Take care. Okay. We are out.